Right, this is going to be episode 38 of OverSight. And the way you know that the Overwatch League season is about to begin is we're going to do one of those mega episodes where we have loads of people come on, and then, you know, it's like the premise is really exciting, you know, it's like one of those big superhero movies where they all team up, you know, like the Avengers or the Justice League. Sadly, I will say, you know, I'm not going to overhype it. It does end up being a bit more like the Justice League that does the Avengers, because the concept's great. Let's put all these people on one show. But the problem is, like, how do you make all those people coexist? So I will say, there will definitely be parts where it's like, if I was putting this on television, some people had hit the cutting room floor, I can't lie. Like, you know, there's people who are just like, discuss, they think they've got a great point to discuss. It's like, yeah, like the last 7 people were talking about that actually. But, you know, and we have to just feign excitement. Like, yeah, oh, shit, you think that the Boston Uprising might not be that good? Well, tell me more.
Look, not everybody can be Iron Man. Somebody has to be Black Widow. That's true. Just how it works, right?
That is true. Even though bizarrely in those
Aero's not going to be the Black Widow of the show.
By the way, Monty, can I just go ahead and say that is one of those areas. I understand these are movies where people are flying and we're suspended disbelief, but I'm just going to say, why do they insist on making characters like Black Widow, Monty, where the characters that she's helping can, like, fucking smash things that are like 7,000 pounds, fly, use godlike powers. She's somehow not getting injured, and she's in there mixing it up with them with just human fighting skills. Like, she's done also like some Taibo or something, and then she's just like, she's alongside like fucking Iron Man. It's like, you know, the problem with those movies is like, they only work because the scale of the opponent for each person is like tuned, like it's like a matchup. Like, they don't have like the worst bad guy fight Black Widow, do they? Because obviously you just fucking tear her head off. Like, somehow the worst bad guy agrees to fight the other really strong Avenger or something. Like, it just doesn't make, it's just so bullshit, isn't it? Whereas actually, Monty, this is actually a good tie-in, because if indeed the Overwatch League was a superhero movie, or indeed an anime, then in fact, yes, the plucky little teams like the Washington Justice, ironic name there, because Justice League this time around is going to be Garbo as well, because that's the thing. Those teams, Monty, would succeed because, you know, we want them to succeed. Like, the storyline's so good. They represent your nation's capital. Like, there's so many things you could do, but it isn't an anime, is it? It isn't one, is it?
If you wanted like proof that it's not, it's the Shanghai Dragons going 0-40 last season despite being fan favorites, right? Also, I'm basically Thanos and just like actually ending half of the Overwatch League fan base at one time. So, you know, you got that too. Except, you know, a lot of people don't know how it's going to end. You know, the Avengers will win in the end, but
of course,
in Overwatch League, I just win every time. So there's no way to come back from that.
Sure. Okay, right, let's get into it. So our first guest to start off I guess the only analogy to make, to be fair, would be the human centipede of this episode, because we're all just talking shit and then picking up on what the other person said. Because the problem is, Aero, this episode is a speculation one, isn't it? Because we haven't actually played any official games. So half the people, by the way, I would expect some divergent opinions, because half the people are going to be going off who they've scrimmed or who they would have signed, who they wouldn't have signed. So I will say, as a caveat at the beginning, this is all fun and games. It's not the end of the world if people have very different opinions. So let's start here, Errol, which is, give us some insight into your team coming into Season 2. Because if people remember the Season 1 team, obviously a lot of problems for the first stages. This is mainly before you were there. And by the end, things started to get going, but because of the league format, you know, there was never going to be any playoffs. It was like an unreasonable expectation. So what should Season 2 expectations be for Dallas Fuel?
Well, so stage 4 for us was kind of like building towards Season 2 from the start. So obviously we tried to make the most of it, but it was focusing on Season 2 from the day I stepped into the office. So the off season was largely centered around filling in some holes. You know, we wanted to, you know, take our roster to the next level just based off how things had progressed throughout the whole season. So expectations, I think. I hold expectations pretty high, because my viewpoint on expectations is like the only ones that really matter are the ones that we put on ourselves. So we have high expectations of ourselves, because
some of the players in Season 1 might debate that point, you know, like some of them, you know, might have been influenced by outside opinions at times, but I agree. Sure. Yeah, the premise is a good one as a coach, certainly.
Sure.
He's changing the core.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Dallas Fuel.
That's right. I took out the foundations, we put in new ones.
It's like he walks over and he goes, no, he goes over
on the edge of a cliff, right?
And he says, effect, I see you seem like you're a bit down at the moment. He goes, the comments, they just never stop. And what he does is he goes, watch, this is actually a coaching technique, I know. He puts the cursor into the top left right-hand box, and he presses the little X on the browser. And when the Chrome tab shuts down, he goes, how do you feel about the comments now? And he goes, I can't see them. And he goes, yeah, exactly. He goes, this is a game changer. This is a game changer.
It was like the clouds parted and it shone down on the X, and it was like, this is how we
exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's more about like focusing on ourselves and our mistakes. I mean, I think people learned in stage 4 that if you aren't too worried about the pressure, what people think of you, you can actually get over some of those things. So that's what we're trying to do in stage 4. We have huge coaching staff now and focusing on all our little mistakes and everything. And one of the things that we want our message to be for like season 2019 or whatever is like, this is a new fuel. We're a family. Like we've turned a new page. This is our new chapter. And so you look at the roster coming in, very different from the roster coming into season 1 in general, and a lot of the changes that happened. So.
Well, along those lines,
are you going to provide some literary foreshadowing for us for the new chapter of the Dallas Fuel?
Yeah, what's the theme
preview?
Of this one?
What's the new fuel looking like?
Stage 4 was the preview, Monty. That's all I'm going to say.
That was the foreshadowing for the 2019
That was the foreshadowing.
Nice.
Well, that's my question, though, Aero. Aero, that is the main question I have, though, is that one of the things that was, at least thematically, in terms of the narrative people put on the stage 4 for the Fuel, was the emergence of Seagull. Like, he was not only a starting player, but he was actually found his niche in a very different role than he'd played previously in his history. And obviously he's a player that is not in the team now. So how has the team changed in that sense? Like, if there's similarities that carry over, what are the differences, do you think, in this Dallas Fuel?
Sure. So one of the main things that we tried to overcome from stage 4 to the next season was flexibility. I think stage 4, we weren't quite as flexible as I was hoping for. I think the team was hoping for. So one of the main things coming in is that we want to be able to be meta proof, or be able to go into new metas and have the hero pools and have the experience, regardless of what ends up popping up. So that's kind of the reasons why we picked up like RCK, and Closer, and Zachary, because it was a lot of filling those shoes. I don't think anyone, Seagull, opted to retire, and that left a pretty big hole between being like our projectile, and then also the ability to flex onto off tank was quite a big thing. So it's kind of filling those holes and be able to have the flexibility to where we have more players that can, have that kind of wide hero pool ability to play multiple things.
Okay, Monty, what thoughts do you have on the Fuel changes in that sense? Because obviously, like, not only was the Seagull one part of the storyline of improving, but then some of the fundamental parts of the team, like obviously one of the players who always got massively praised on this team for flexibility actually was someone like Chip Cyan, right? And no more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the new players are a good addition overall. The thing about the Fuel is, like, it was never really a skill issue. Obviously, like, we can say that because there are a lot of players that have won titles, on this roster still. And so it was sort of an organizational and coaching issue. And I think the really tough transition for the Fuel was always going to be when they started losing, because with Envy, they had such an incredible win streak, such an incredible run. They were the first major team to win a tournament in Korea in a team-based game. Like they had a lot of firsts, right? And I think the issue is that when that team starts losing and you start to have coaches, because they didn't really have a coach before, right? They were not coached during the Envy era. When you have that team start losing and you introduce a coach, they're not really going to trust that coach, because if coaching as a process, but it will, if you start to institute a hierarchy within the team, it's going to take some time to adapt to that, and you might lose some games along the way. But if you're used to winning, the players will always say, oh no, we were winning before when we did it ourselves, so why the fuck do we need this coach who's causing us to lose right now? So it's really hard, I think, to implement a system in a team that is accustomed to winning under a certain condition, and that certain condition is with a very loose leadership structure. which can work, but I don't advocate. So I think it's hard for them to overcome that. And I think that now with Aero and a more like strict hierarchy in place, that they're able to finally work through that. And I think that they just need an off season to adapt to that structure rather than sort of like throwing everything in there in the middle of the season. Like, I don't envy you at all, Aero, coming in stage 4 under those conditions, right? That's got to be super tough.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, when I decided to sign, there was a few things going through my head. Number one, I
remember us talking about it at the time. I was like, you got a guaranteed contract, right? Like, you can't guaranteed money on this one.
Yeah. I wanted the challenge. I felt like if we, just the history of the fuel envy stuff in Overwatch, I think that if things went well, it would have been really good for my career personally.
Sure, yeah.
But also, like, I didn't think that the players were actually that bad. It just felt like, there was a lot of things that happened that kind of made things fall apart.
Sure.
And one of the things I've noticed about esports in history, other games, things I've seen, whatever, is that there isn't really a ton of infrastructure around teams and coaching and going all the way down until recently. And so I think coming in with that mindset of, I was trying to model, I'm trying to model Fuel after kind of like an NBA team where we have, coaches for different roles, but we all work together.
Okay.
And to where it's very, like, it's strict, but it's not harsh. I don't know if that's the best way to explain it, but it's very structured schedule. We know exactly what we're doing every day, exactly what we're working on. Scrims are always directed towards something. There's times where we scrim our contenders team, and it's like we literally just practice King's Row for 2 hours straight, or like we practiced Shrine on Nepal last week for like an hour and a half straight on a couple different comps. So it's like we have a very structured practice. We try to have certain focuses, and then with all the coaches, it makes it to where we can have people focused on the individual and also focused on like the overall macro strategy around it. So with Overwatch, there's just so much happening at one time. To be able to have the extra eyes helps me a lot personally. I think it helps the players too. So.
Okay. Right, before we go on, which obviously we want to talk about some of the other teams, like one last question I had on the Dallas Fuel is, in line with what Monty was saying there, part of the issue in Season 1 was no one really knew from the outside who is responsible for these things. Like, is Kai choosing everything about the team? Does he choose who's in the team, who gets subbed, who they sign? Does he choose the style? So as a result, it's very hard to kind of like...
I mean, obviously that was like a hot mess of a situation because they were speaking out of both sides of their mouth, because it was like Kai has complete control, yet clearly he didn't have complete control over the roster, like what was happening. Well, here's the real question. Who has complete control? Do you have complete control over the team, Aero?
When I was in initial negotiations, I told them that I wanted complete control of everything. And that like if there was anything that would be like a major red flag, I'd welcome like the conversation. But I wanted complete control, like, over everything. So if anything goes wrong, I want to point it at me, and like I'm confident enough to be able to.
Did you get that?
Yeah,
that's a cool story about what you wanted.
Yep.
So you got it.
Cool. I did get that. Yes.
Okay. Right, I think what we should do, being as on this episode, with all the different people, we're eventually going to talk about almost every team in the league, but obviously each person, there's not going to be time for each person to talk about every team in the league. I would prefer, as you start out, people talk about teams they're interested in. So who's a team, Aero, in the league? Could be an existing team or one of the expansion teams. Who's a team that's of interest to you? Like something about them grabs you, or something maybe the public don't know that's interesting?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and take the easy one here that I know everyone's going to talk about, is Spark.
Okay.
I think they're a very interesting team. One that before they moved to NA, there was a lot of talk that they weren't the strongest incoming Chinese team. And then when they came to North America, to us, they were very clearly the strongest incoming.
In what way did they stand out as strong?
It's that they're very coordinated in their team play. I mean, there's other teams that seemingly have standout individual play or individual, decision making. But in terms of how they work as a team, Spark definitely is one of the best right now. Which was surprising for us because it's so many different rosters combined into one. So it was really surprising to see, and we're excited. I'm personally excited to see how they do in the first stage, because they seem like a strong team. So
this is the team, Monty, where like I'm the one who's kept track of this the whole way, because I just know from other esports the history of what happens when you kind of like my joke would be like the Korean fucking diaspora, like when you don't have region locking and you let people just pick up Koreans. The problem is it becomes like a gold rush. People go, picking up Koreans seems pretty good actually. I'll see if I can get the next best Koreans. I'm going to go ahead and say it now, Monty. If this particular team is really good, it's game over for everyone who thinks that like Western players are coming to the Overwatch League, because this just proves you really can just recruit a whole bunch of Koreans and get one of the better teams in the league.
So I think the thing about this team, though, is that this was the diamonds in the rough team. I think if you look at their results, on the teams they came from, obviously like Lucky Future Zenith was very good in China, but again, it's Chinese contenders, so the bar wasn't as high necessarily as Korean contenders. And then the players that were in Korean contenders, I'm sure we'll talk to Wolf about this later when he's on the show. The players in Korean contenders were not, X6 didn't, like, they were good, but they sort of choked a lot.
Yes.
But I think that if you actually know these teams and you look at the players they got, it's sort of like they formed like fucking like Voltron out of this like roster. Like they have they picked all the good players from these teams and like slammed them together, and now you got something that's going to be really good. Now, I thought that this team was going to take a while to ramp up because of the language differences within the roster, like with Gushui and coming in, like the Chinese Korean difference. But it seems like they're already super good, which is surprising to me. I thought it might take them some time to like, ramp up, but they're here and they're fucking ready to play apparently.
Does the current meta, Aero, is it one in which communication is like at a premium? Like, is that very, very difficult? Because obviously that's an angle that people will find very bizarre, is that whenever you make a team that's basically Korean and Chinese players, they're actually in an even worse communication spot than any other team, because they're usually communicating in a flawed second language for each set of players. So do you think in the current meta, is that an aspect that surprises you, or can you get away with kind of basic communication, do you think?
As someone who has lots of people speaking a second language, I think communication is extremely important in this meta, but you can kind of cut corners by using like keywords. So as long as everyone understands what it means when you say like one of our keywords is maneuver, which is a weird one, but it just kind of everyone knows what it means. If say we're going to maneuver, everyone's on the same page. So as long as I think it's extremely important, but there's ways that you can overcome it with kind of shortcuts. So you just
listen,
can't get super deep.
if you guys don't get this next Scrim result, I'm going to maneuver your fucking asses to the academy team. Quickster, toot sweet. There's a lot of terminology thrown around, Monty.
That's what it means in Delta too. So
right, what about this then? I'm not going to make this like we used to have a joke on our League of Legends show that like if I ask someone a question where it's like to even attempt to answer the question risks the ire of all the fans. The analogy I used to give is like obviously that's my gig on the shows. I just wade out there and say all the crazy shit. So I used to say it's like I'm in the minefield and I'm like, hey, come out, the water's nice. Like join me in the minefield. It's like let's see if you can make it past all the mines. So I don't want to seem like I'm setting you up, Aero. But here's the thing. It's not that interesting to only talk about the good teams, obviously. So sure. I'm not going to say pick me a bad team because, who can know who's bad, actually? We haven't seen any official games. But yeah, is there a team out there who, you see how I did that? I was very effective there. Who in the league? Really? Exactly. Who in the league do you have questions about? Who are you kind of skeptical of some of the teams? Again, can be established team, can be a new team.
Questions about. Well, we'll pick one that I'm curious to see how Chengdu does.
Okay.
Because I think we didn't actually get to scrim them, but just like rumors flying around and all kinds of stuff, it feels like they're not quite at the level that people were hoping for. But
I mean, the context for anyone who doesn't know is whereas, for example, the Hangzhou team is like mainly Korean players, and obviously Shanghai Dragons now is mainly Korean players. This is the team that's basically all Chinese. I mean, it has a player from Taiwan as well. So the fear, if you're an outside layman, is this going to be Shanghai Dragons 2.0? Right? Is there a sense in the community that like they're just a complete unknown like that? Like maybe they are going to have problems.
I don't think anyone thinks that they'll have quite as rough a season as Shanghai did last one.
No.
But they're not. I don't think that they're gonna do particularly well. But I'll take a scapegoat answer and say like with this current meta, one of the most important things is communication. So it's one that you can come back and still have good results against good teams as long as you're all on the same page. It just we'll leave it at that.
This is a total out of left field question. So I don't expect anyone to actually necessarily know the answer. But in China, do they play goats? Does anyone know?
I haven't watched the Chinese contender scene recently, so
okay, fair enough.
I heard it's a lot of anti-goats comps going on.
Okay, that could be interesting. Then what do you think of this team, Monty?
So they won't have the communication issues because they're actually the only all Chinese roster. And they're not going to be the Shanghai Dragons. They actually do have some good players from like Miraculous Youngster back in the day. And, it was interesting when I was talking to them too, because I was quite surprised to see Bacon Jack on this roster because Bacon Jack hasn't played he played at the World Cup in 2017, but wasn't at the World Cup for Taiwan this year. And I literally asked him, I was like, so where'd Bacon Jack come from? Like, I thought he was great. I thought he was a good player, but I hadn't seen him in a while. And he wasn't playing in like the Asia Pacific contenders, tournaments. And they're like, oh, he was playing PUBG. And I was like, oh, okay. So did you try him out? And they said, no, we just got him back from PUBG. I was like, interesting, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Like they identified that he was a skilled player. Obviously, being Taiwanese, he's going to speak the same language as the rest of the roster. And they don't need him to perform. Like they have enough DPS players that if he doesn't perform, it's fine. But it was interesting to me that they would pull this player back from a different game, sort of sight unseen again. So we'll see how that works out for them.
That's where if Blizzard really had steel balls, what they'd do, Monty, is they'd do a commercial with Bacon Jack and it'd be like, where are we dropping, lads? He's like, into the Overwatch League. Like, esports, cool. Like that's what I would do. And it'd be all of his friends from PUBG, like, oh, cool, he's going into esports. Like, I'd make it like mad shade on the game,
I think they should just make an Overwatch Battle Royale. That's my personal opinion. But and that way, he can do both at the same time. But some people might take that as a negative about Chengdu, but like I think that's actually like a good way to work with the roster because a lot of the Miraculous Youngster players as well went off and started playing PUBG because it was a very popular game in Asia at the time and still is. So it makes sense, but these guys still have the proper mechanics to play the game. So if you're going to bring these guys back that at one time were like highly skilled Overwatch players, at least they've been practicing their mechanics in the meantime. And you can sort of revive them into Overwatch. So I think it's interesting. I'm excited to see how they do. I don't know how well they're going to do immediately, but it's cool at least to have an all Chinese roster and one that is going to be a lot better than Shanghai at the very least.
Sure. Because the context for people who wondered why like a player would quit Overwatch. If you were a Chinese player and you didn't get onto the Shanghai Dragons, you might not know if you'd ever play in the Overwatch League because obviously, unlike Koreans, no one was importing Chinese players to play on Western rosters, So it totally makes sense to me why in their little region, where for a while they were sort of self-contained, people thought Overwatch isn't going to pop up for us.
Also, the streaming money in China, I think, was like with PUBG, honestly. So right. I think there were reasons if you were trying to be a streamer to do that. But yeah, totally agree that if you were already a famous player from Overwatch and you had a chance to, move to a different game because you weren't picked up in Overwatch League, obviously it's going to be different now. Okay. Yeah. And I also think it's smart. I think the long play for Chengdu is good because as the all Chinese roster, I think they're going to have their first say over up and coming Chinese players. Yes. And the reality of the Chinese scene is that a lot of great Chinese players are still not 18. They're not eligible to play. Sure. Like a lot of the World Cup team that was really good So I think in the future, because they are all Chinese, they're going to have their first pick of Chinese players. So as a long-term play, even if Chengdu isn't good this season, like I think they can be good in the future.
Okay. Right, Aero, as sort of a last topic, one thing I wanted to ask you was, when teams scrim, and it's obviously not like internally, like it's not the academy team and the main team, when two separate teams scrim each other, in Overwatch, are there actually like conditions set up to the scrim? Do you just scrim them and we play as though it was a match, and it's obviously an unofficial match, but we just play for real, and then we all separately go away? Are there actually scrims where it's like you can make requests of the other team, we're going to practice this specific thing, or can we only practice this map? What is it like at the moment in the scene?
So the standard for everybody right now is everyone goes in and you pick 3 maps you want to play, and they pick 3 maps you want to play, and you try to complete all 6. And then usually you don't, like if you in control maps, you don't play out all 5 or whatever. You just play the 3, one stage each. It's not. If we want to do a match, which we have done, I do it sometimes. I set it up like way in advance, like, hey, I'm going to treat this one like an official match.
Right.
So I don't want to reset. We're going to play these 4 maps.
You have an academy team, though. Do you use your academy team in a different way when you do you play them at all? Like, what's the deal there?
Yeah, we do use them. We use them for very specific practice, playing against a specific matchup or a specific map. We use.
So you use them to mimic other teams.
Yeah.
So you tell them what to do.
I tell them exactly what to do. I tell them in advance, like, you're going to play this comp. They'll be like, can we swap off goats? I'm like, well, no.
Enforced goats.
Do they like that?
Yeah.
Sometimes they do. We've had some fun ones.
Basically, they're like the guy, Monty, who gets the 4 a.m. night shift when you have to watch something around the clock. Like, someone has to pull the bad shift on it. Not everyone can, you have to pull rank on them. So,
yeah.
All right, I've got a last topic then before we go to the next section. Is there a team in the lineup that is, like, for you, at least from things you've heard or seeing these power rankings people put out, who's like an underrated team, do you think? Like, who for you, for whatever reason, maybe it was your scrims or something you think about the lineup, who do you think's kind of not gotten their fair attention or, hype around them as a team? Because there's a lot of new teams, obviously, so who would you pick of all the squads?
Yeah, I think for the long term, I think Guangzhou Charge are a little underrated, but I don't put them necessarily top 5 or anything. But I think they are a little better than most people would think. So for a long term, when I imagine how the meta is going to shift over the next couple of weeks and then into the next stages, I think that they'll do well in the long term.
And
so
is that based on some scrimming and stuff? Yeah.
Seeing some of the comps they've ran and how they've run them, a lot of the individual stuff is really done really well, and there's some teamwork things that aren't necessarily done very well for them right now. And I think that if they can get past that, they could be a strong team. They're ones that I see the potential in them to be a really strong team. Within the next however long, whatever stage 2 is, next month, I think they could do well.
Well, Happy is a nuts mechanical player. So if you guys want a Guangzhou player to watch Happy, because that guy has some of the best mechanics I think I've seen. It's crazy how good he is.
What I find fascinating about this team is this has to be the most weird experiment I've ever seen, because you've got this team where it's Korean players, Chinese players, then it's guy from the UK plus guy from the USA. Are those two guys just both sat there was it room 7B I was supposed to be in? Why are they in this team? What is this?
You know what's interesting is I asked Guangzhou when I met with them. I went over to their house and they common English mostly in the game because for those people who don't know, Koreans don't tend to learn Chinese in school. They tend to learn English, and Chinese people aren't learning Korean. So the only way their roster can communicate in game is in English. So actually, weirdly, having the American and the British guy is working for them. But
are they supposed to be some sort of shot callers in that context? Then was it implied?
No, I mean they can't really. The thing is that the complexity obviously isn't there. Like they're speaking in English because that's for very short periods of time. Like a lot of the strategic complexity is still done in Korean. So it's a little bit janky, I think, in terms of their communication right now.
Fair enough. Right. Anyway, thanks for coming on, Aero, and helping us with the first segment here.
I appreciate you having me.
So our next guest is going to be Custa here, formerly of the Dallas Fuel, but we don't talk about that. We talk about the good times. Why would we talk about like the worst times in someone's life, the depression, the crippling anxiety of fans just, tearing you up, constantly criticizing, putting you under the microscope. So you didn't want any of that. So what you did is you moved to the LA Valiant, a team where the expectations again are to win everything, to make lineups work with interesting groups of players, to change coaching staff at different times in the season. There's a lot of similarities here. So Custa, one of the things I noticed is you actually didn't seem to get flamed that much of the people who were on the Dallas Fuel. Maybe because the timing was you kind of like were one of the few bright spots in when you were at the end of your period there. And obviously coming to the LA Valiant, they had their best results towards the end when you were in the team. So how do you think season 1 went for you?
Well, there was a lot of fires, I would say, in Dallas when I was a part of it. So, it was pretty
thematically accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was doing okay. Like I didn't play like great in Dallas, but I think I was doing okay. And that's sort of why like everyone was sort of like forgetting about me or letting me just like roll by. But once I got traded to Valiant, everything picked up. Obviously it sucked when I first got traded, but after, looking at the results now, I think with Dallas, I went like 4-16, and with Valiant, I went.
Come on, didn't you have like didn't you have like a party when you got traded? Like, wasn't this a great move? Like, why were you not happy about this? Well, you're like, I got traded to a better team. Hooray.
Well, when I first got asked, they were like, yo, we want to trade you. And the first thing you think whenever it's like, we want to get rid of you, you're like, oh man, fuck these guys. And then then I thought about it for an hour. I'm like, wait a second. Like, this could be a good thing. On the other hand, Valiant was also from the outside being
what do you mean? Did you open the Overwatch League app on your phone? You hit the standings button. You're like, oh,
they're in top 6.
Oh shit! I didn't think about that. Like, what? Why did it take you so long?
I don't know, because everyone heard bad things about Valiant as well, though. Remember, at the end of stage 2, everyone was like Valiant. They were having their massive problems. They were gutting coaching staff, as Thorin said. So it was I wasn't sure if I was going from one problem to another problem. But looking back at it now, obviously everything's working out. They picked up a lot of good coaches. They picked up a lot of good players. Well, Space came 18 and all that kind of stuff. So it was good.
Okay. Well, no, that's also the other reason why if you looked at the Liquipedia page, you might change your mind because you're like, oh, they actually have a functional tank and a core of DPS players. Well, this is a whole new world.
You're saying Time is not a functional tank. I want you to take that back, right?
I know.
He did his best under tough circumstances.
It was a tough fucking run, honestly.
I don't know if you've seen this, Custa, because what games was your background in before Overwatch?
TF2 in Australia. So
okay, I don't know in TF2 if people spend their whole career, stuck in certain roles, if there's much swap over. But I know one thing that triggers me in every other game I've ever played, like Counter-Strike, League of Legends, is there is a type of logic that a lot of pro players use, which is just so triggering, where they go, their logic is that the idea of well, I'm a good player because I practice, and I apply myself to it. And basically the premise is that oh, I'm not just good at whatever top lane in League of Legends. I'm not just a good entry fragger. As a good player, I could switch up and do any role if I wanted to. It's anyone who actually believed that. I think the Dallas Fuel of Season 1 Overwatch League shows that that's probably not the case. You should probably stick to your strengths. If you're Taimu, the move to bring yourself back is probably become really good at DPS again, not try and become a tank player and invert all of your instincts and everything you've ever done in the game and just start from nothing. That's if I was having a bit of trouble, I've lost a bit of my fluency in Russian, Monty, so I just started learning Chinese. Not only Chinese, but it's
the same.
I know what they'll say is I'm good at languages, right? So
there we go.
Why keep learning Russian when I could just learn? I'm good at languages. Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah, it's crazy how many players that have tried to do it in the history of just I play DPS really well, so therefore I can play Diva like really well, and then they go play Diva and they don't know what they're doing. They're like, I don't know what happened. I couldn't see this.
Because that's actually why in your team, Custa, the player that I've always been interested by is Kruise, because this guy literally does, depending on the day of the week, seemingly. It's like he does this the tarot reading, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but the night was reversed, so I'm gonna have to play DPS in this game." And then everyone just looks to that coach, and he just goes, "You know who I ride or die with this guy, so put him in the DPS position." Like, what is that guy's mentality? Who is Kruise as a player? Seems like a very interesting character.
Kruise like an incredibly versatile player that I actually think can play DPS. It's sort of been like very wishy-washy. Obviously, Valiant had the same problems that Dallas did, where they were like, we need to fill the DPS role, so we need someone to play it. So like, Kruise, very talented as a player, can actually sort of have the versatility. But as with anything, if you don't put Scrim time into it, you don't have like the hundreds of hours and like the thousands of hours in like the respective role. It's really hard to sort of keep up that level. So Chris being very wishy-washy. He's actually back on DPS now, if you weren't aware. So he was on support in season 1, on to DPS now for season 2. So.
Kruise, aka the nightmare of every Liquipedia Overwatch edit. It's like, which role is he? Just tell me, please, which role he is. Like, here's the thing: does he himself choose when he changes to DPS? Like for example, does he just secretly want to be a DPS player? Like, how does it work as to why he keeps moving back and forth?
I think he just wants some solidarity himself, but I think due to his talent, like it definitely hasn't always been his decision. I think like in the past, like he was, but these days it's just sort of, you need to fill this role, and if you're not willing to fill this role, like it's kind of hard. Like with Kruise on DPS now, we have Izayaki, who after playing with him a lot is, I would say, mechanically one of the best Zens up there, competing with, the Jonax. So as Kruise, it's sort of like, if you want to fill the role within the team, like the best thing to do is play DPS.
So let's talk about the changes that happened with the Valiant. So a lot of fans are upset that Soon is no longer on the team because he was very popular and, a good player. The way I look at it is, after you guys got Bunny, you sort of had redundancy in a way. But also, like we're talking about Kruise moving to DPS, he was your support line partner last season. Izayaki is now here with a visa and able to play, which is a difference between last season. So how has the transition been without Soon and with playing with Izayaki?
Yeah, it's been different, especially seeing as the meta's votes, and it's like very different to anything we've sort of like thought about before. So it's been interesting. Soon was kind of a weird one, because when Soon was a part of the team, everyone's like, Valiant doesn't have a star DPS plaplayer, and then Soon leaves, and they're like, well, there goes their only star.
I said that.
Yeah, well, you said that.
These things that I said.
Yeah. So so now that Soon's gone, everyone's like, oh no, they don't have anyone to fill that role. But
I thought you never did. So
we have a lot of redundancies within our team. I think we have the flexibility, like you said, Bunny, who's like hit scan and tracer sort of specialist. KSF, that I think, including yourself, a lot of people underrate, but us as a team actually respect a lot. So I think with a lot of coaching, like he definitely has the skill.
He also underrates himself. Like he's not a super confident player or something.
Yeah, he's never competed like at the top level, and that's sort of his biggest issue. Like he, even before the Overwatch League, he never really played in any major tournaments. He was just sort of coming up, so he sort of rode the bench for season 1, and like no one's really seen what he's doing. So he's not a cocky player who's going to be like, I'm going to come into the league and I'm going to kick all these kids down.
No, he's not a shock player. You're right.
Yeah.
He's not a shocking player, as you could have said there. Yes, exactly.
But yeah, and then you have Kruise in the DPS role. So you have KSF, Kruise, Bunny, and then you have Brady, Agilities, who just sort of like the 4 players, which I agree, maybe on paper doesn't look like the highest class of DPS, but you can't doubt our ability to have flexibility within that like thing. We have Kyle, who's actually like ridiculous on Hangzhou if that ever comes up, because that was sort of a problem in season 1. You got the Genjis, you got the Farahs with Brady and all that kind of stuff. So across the board, I think we're pretty covered. But yeah, whether or not that's gonna match up with the very, very best DPS players that we saw in season 1, we'll see.
So tell us about playing with Izayaki now. What do you like about playing with Izayaki? What's changed? What do you think your strengths are as like a support duo?
I think that the strength of Izayaki, he doesn't speak a ton of English. That was also a problem on top of his visa things last season. He's he never really practiced it. So him coming in, we were trying to like getting him over that hurdle. But the strength of his arc is he's one of those players that just plays with his heart and just is mechanically gifted in that way. He's always clicking heads. He's always smart. He's generally making the right decision as like from his own standpoint. So it just comes down to meshing him with the team, which is always going to take time when you have the language barrier that we do. But we're definitely getting there. He's incredibly talented. Now I'm actually really looking forward to playing him in season 2.
Right. What about this then? Being as for some reason, aside from the geolocation aspect, people are trying their hardest to make that whole like it's the battle of LA, the two big teams. Even though not for 1 second in the entire Overwatch League was that ever a legit actual fucking narrative. Like
actually, so here's the thing, Thorin. Like you may not know, but like honestly, in the arena when the LA teams play each other, it is hands down the fucking craziest.
I mean, it's the home game.
Yeah,
but it really like. As silly as it sounds when all the LA teams are playing out of the same arena, the atmosphere is very different on the Gladiators versus Valiant days. Like the crowd is like insane on those days. Okay. And there's like, they actually like divide themselves down the middle of the arena and all of the fans show up in like costumes and shit. And they're just like shouting. They're like trash talking each other like across the aisle. It's pretty fun. It really is pretty fun.
The world doesn't stop, but yeah, there's definitely some semblance of a rivalry going.
Well, I mean, at this point, I will just very, very delicately make some sort of a joke which implies like, people from California who respect the concept of borders. And I'll then just leave a pause. No one will say anything and we'll move on, this is the question I was going to say, which was, since everyone always wants to know about Valiant, Gladiators, what do you think of the Gladiators coming into season 2?
I thought they were like massively overhyped. Going into season 2. But after I've been scrimming them and seeing them play, like you sort of see a lot of their problems were fixed from season 1 going into season 2. I think Decay is insane. And he's going to fill that roster really well. I think Raw is an incredibly good tank that can match up just as easily to Fisher in terms of like filling that role. So I think when you put another like incredibly strong hit scan DPS player and someone who's also very flexible in Decay, and then you add Raw, who has like consistency to the main tank role, they actually have like a really solid roster, especially when you're thinking of a Western mix. I also think Ripper's really good. I'm not sure if he's better than Shaz, but yeah, there's definitely something
he can't
different
play
there.
For the first few games, so
yeah, him and half of the league can't play for the first couple of games. So
okay. Right, one thing, Monty, last season, one of the things about the Gladiators, which was like, it looked at one point in time like it was going to derail them, was the part where obviously people thought that as Diva changed, if Bishu couldn't be in the lineup, the whole logic was like he was translating for the Korean players, and so it was going to like cripple the communication or whatever. Like in this particular team now, is Bishu actually supposed to be playing in the starting lineup, do you think?
I think they'll probably change it. Like one thing the Gladiators is super good at doing is specializing their players and rotating them out on certain maps or game types. So I imagine we'll continue to see Bishu and Void sort of interchange. I don't know the logic that they're going to use on that, but Gladiators are actually one of the best teams I think about utilizing their full roster and like figuring out ways to make themselves really strong even when swapping out players. So I think we'll see him. Still.
Because that was like, to me, one of the biggest cock teasers of the first season was like, if you watched Apex back in the day, you were like, what? They're getting Void to go with Fisher. Oh, baby, it's back. And then it's like, you never even got to see it. Like, what the fuck?
Back.
Where is it? Where is it? I missed it. Like, it never happened. What the fuck? That's so whack.
Yeah, Void is an interesting one because it was weird that he wasn't picked up as a player at the start of the season.
For sure, yeah.
So obviously it was. I mean, I don't think it needs to be said that it seems pretty clear that it was Fisher's influence that brought him to the team. Except he stayed and Fisher left.
Yes.
But yeah, I think he's still going to be a very good player.
Because the thing is, you look around the league, like think of all the teams that could have used a player like Void. Like Dallas Fuel's a good one. These are teams who needed that position. It was like actually that was a position that was pretty light on the ground if you think about it.
I think flex tank in general, there is a pretty need heavy position for a lot of teams in the league. Like good flex tanks are, I think, not a dime a dozen, right? They're one of the hardest positions to fill. And like, especially because a lot of the meta has just been that player playing diva, but I think people are going to see that flex tanks are going to be playing DPS, probably
something different at times. Yeah.
A lot of flex tanks are going to be playing DPS, I think, as this season starts. So they're really like putting the flex back in that role. So you can't just be like a one trick diva anymore in that position,
which is interesting. It's
Scott?
Just sort of interesting because there's I would say probably half the divas in the league can flex like really well. Some of them have like really good aims in other roles, and then you have other diva players that honestly just can't play DPS like at the level that it needs to be done. So it's going to be really interesting to see what teams do in that situation of like, do we just bring in a DPS player, and if we ever have to play diva, we put the DPS player on diva, and then we just have him so we can have a strong DPS core if we're doing that like 3 DPS stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what teams do it. From like what I've seen, there's no real answer right now. So it really comes down to how good triple DPS ends up being compared to GOATs, and if it's like actually a long-term viable strat.
Let's talk about your flex tank then. Space, probably the best American player these days, now that Dreamcasper has been exiled from the league for good reasons.
Yeah.
So Space was excellent last season, except in the playoffs when he sort of choked. I would say
him and the rest of the team. So,
yeah, but him in particular. I would say the difference between Space's like regular season performance and playoff performance was pretty like significant. I understand he's a young guy, first time in playoffs in a high pressure situation. I'm sure he'll getting the nerves of steel will come with time.
Yeah.
But how's he doing on the DPS roles?
He's definitely we're sort of like trying it out bits and pieces because I don't want to give too much away about like the classes that are required to be played, but some of them are like kind of hard. We also don't Space doesn't have a ton of experience on like much of these DPS characters, so we've been trying him on DPS and like saying is it that much of a gap? Is it bad? Do we need him to be on diva? Like, is there any situation we actually need a diva player? Like, so can we just switch him out? Is this like a prime situation to run like one of our 4 DPS players in that role? Space, as I said, like his, the classes that he needs to play are okay, but is okay good enough? That's we're trying to like flip that up and coin toss that now.
Okay, right, Custa. Just because it's an obnoxious thing that people like to do in esports, I'm just going to do that thing where I'm like, right, you're from Australia and that Color Hex guy's from New Zealand, so basically the same thing, right?
We're pretty much the same people.
So how is what is essentially your brother? How's he going to do in the Overwatch League? How is Color Hex going to do on the Boston Uprising? Because obviously a lot of people aren't going to know this player. They're not going to know where to set the expectations. So can you give us some insight?
So I actually, because I moved so early, I haven't really played against him or with him in any capacity. But I remember watching the Australian Contenders Finals about a year ago, and he was there and he was playing in the grand final for Sydney Drop Bears, and he crushed everybody. His Pharah is like really nasty. His Genji's really solid. I think he's a really smart player, and with Goomba behind him on Boston as well, I think he's going to be working like a lot with him to sort of boost up the things. I know he did a really good job with agilities, so and they play the same role. So I think it'll be good. I think it was ballsy by Boston to go with Blase and Color Hex as their only 2 like real DPS players on that team, because both have 0 experience. I think they can both be great players, but having no redundancies to both those players is going to be a risk, and we'll have to see if it pays off, because maybe one pops off, maybe Color Hex is great, but Blase isn't, or like vice versa. Yeah. Then you have like a huge hole in your team that's like pretty hard to fill.
To be fair to Boston, like they were super good at scouting DPS players last season. I mean, if we look at obviously, like it was great that they had the redundancy of having mistakes there because of what happened with Dreamcasper. But if we look at all of their DPS players, like nobody expected Dreamcasper to be that good. Nobody expected Striker to be that good. Nobody expected Mistakes to be that good. So they do seem to have at least an ability to identify like excellent DPS players that other teams are not, currently considering, that are sort of, less prominent in stature, but still very good in skill. So I'm curious to see if they can do it again.
Has that coaching staff like The people that
Well,
were
yeah, they don't have
scouting
Krusty anymore, obviously.
Yeah,
but
do you think Krusty was the main like influencer of picking up those players? Do you think they still have the same like insight?
I mean, maybe Striker was Krusty, but I think
Yeah.
like the others were Huck.
Dreamcaster
so-
probably wasn't. Yeah. Well, yeah. Like I, as I said, I think Blase and Color Hex are both very good players, but you know, the league's obviously a different level, and going through the whole season is going to be fucking interesting for them, especially someone like Color Hex coming all the way from New Zealand. It's very different up here. So.
Well, it's also that he's not even eligible to play for the first few games, I believe. So.
Yeah, I think something to do with.
I think that's going to be an issue
stuff.
for Boston in stage one. Is that they only have one DPS player in a meta where people are going to see at times, like of course people are expecting goats. People are also going to see triple or quad DPS. So having one eligible DPS player for first few matches is going to be rough. It's going to be rough.
Time.
That's actually where for Boston, this is an example of where like. I wish we had in Overwatch what they have now in League of Legends, Monty. Where there's that like database where you can look up someone's contract and you can find out how many years the contract.
Yeah, I wish we had that.
But the problem is they don't in League of Legends. All they have there is like how many years you have the contract for. I wish we just had it like sports where we knew what the payroll was. Because here's the thing. I know people don't want to reveal it because of like the moment it gives teams an edge in negotiations and stuff. But the sad thing is, where it ends up hurting teams is exactly like this type of show. Like if I'm trying to evaluate a team, well, the difference is if this was an NFL team or an NBA team, and I know that they didn't spend the most money, if you're a small market team and you're like I'll give you an example, like if you're like the Milwaukee Bucks or something, like clearly you're never going to like spend the most money in the NBA because you haven't got the market to be a team that wastes that much money. So as a result, if you can just get a team that was, for example, like the third best in the NBA, you might actually have overperformed. You might have done an amazing job with your resources. And so with Boston, having seen now the lineups they've put together in 2 seasons, I want to know, are they actually trying to be like, we're geniuses in scouting and we'll go for like really unorthodox players? Or do they have to? Is it like necessity,
I think most people can tell you that Boston is not spending the most money, right?
Yeah.
I don't know particularly how much money they're spending, but it's very clear that they're not spending a lot of money.
They're not trying to win, as you can say. Like they're just trying to run with as best they can, and we can all agree they succeeded like very heavily in season.
For sure, yeah,
absolutely.
Everyone looked at that roster and like they're going to be 12th by a good margin, and then they ended up going 10-0 in stage 3 and having a good run. Obviously, they sort of crashed and burned a little at the end, but they had a good run. Looking at
not to mention they went 10-0 after losing a star player too. So. That was very impressive that they were able to rebound on that. So clearly something, and they lost their coach, and they were still doing fine. Like, So
plus, Monty, like, how deep are we going to go on this? Like, it's one thing if you're like, I've been watching the NA contenders, and actually this guy's not getting enough love, so let's draft him. This is like they're going out of their way to try and set themselves up as like geniuses at scouting. They were like, and for our next player, you guys are going to be really excited. This is a really big announcement. A 23-year-old player from the Brazilian scene. It's like, what the fuck? There even are Brazilian people in Overwatch. What?
Actually, that guy, I think that was a really smart call. When I was casting Overwatch World Cup this last year, like we did the LA stop, and that was where Brazil was playing, and he looked really good on an individual level. Like his
also looks like Idra in real life, bizarrely, but that's just an Easter egg, an aside. If anyone looks him up, he does like.
Yeah, like 1% of our audience is going to know who Idra is, but I appreciate that.
I appreciate him.
But yeah, I think he was actually a very good pickup. Like if you're Boston and you're looking for, you're using the World Cup as a scouting tool to kind of find diamonds in the rough, like that was a good pickup.
That's the other problem, isn't it? Every fucker out there who's a GM is like, remember how Philly got EQO from the Israel Overwatch World Cup team? Everyone's like scouting the Overwatch. Like it's like they wait until the team goes out and they're like, is there any good players here? Like, am I a genius? Which one actually could be the good player? We'll see if that actually. I have to say, because if you know the context, like you just referenced, that they don't have they probably aren't going to be making big, there's no big signings here, put it that way. Like, I think it's not reasonable to expect Boston to be that good a team.
Unless they did do as good of a run they did last season with the roster. Like, I think they're a lot more.
It was easier last season to do what they did on a budget.
Yeah.
If they could do it again, it's going to be super impressive. It's going to be like if Boston somehow makes playoffs at the end of the season again, that's going to be amazing.
Yeah,
I agree.
Okay, right. To finish up Custa, pick one more team to talk about. It can be a good one, a bad one. Just pick one more that you think would be interesting to talk about. Who catches your eye?
I think the one that like Monty's been talking about, I think Spark's really good. I think they're a really interesting team that's going to come up a lot. I think they have a pretty deep roster, but they're just like Korean contenders.
Yes.
Am I right? Like about that? They just
somewhere in
China
China as well.
Chinese contenders.
and they have Chinese. So like, but that from what we've been playing against them, they seem like a really smart team. They seem to be like knowing what they're doing. I think maybe they have the benefit that they've been playing like goats for a while within the contenders region and stuff like that. But they're definitely looking strong. Whether or not they can run with that, like you can tell that how much hours and how much like pressure they're sort of putting on themselves, like going into this league.
Do they have like a star player, like a standout that you've so far?
I really like that Lucio player. I think he's like really fucking good. IDK. I've been watching him. I would say he's probably one of the best in the league. He really impressed me. Just I think within every role, like that's sort of what they don't have that one DPS player that I'm like, wow, this guy's gonna blow out of the water. The thing that impresses me is that whole roster as like a core just was like really good across them. And I think they're the ones that's going to turn the most heads. And I think like people are like hyping Vancouver up like crazy, and I think they're not going to do so hot, and I think Spark are going to do really well. So
I agree. I think Vancouver is pretty overrated, especially considering they just got to the States. I don't know what kind of practice they've been getting. Yeah. I think just in general, from knowing, Korean players, that it takes them some time to adapt to different regions, and I think that because they were here so late, like just the shock to the system of like living in the US and trying to get a grip on that is going to like kind of bring down their performance. But we'll see.
Just the amount of pressure they have from fans as well. Like everyone's buying their jerseys, everyone's saying they're going to be the next best thing within the league, and so everyone from the outside. I'm
pretty cold
like,
on Vancouver. I'll be real.
Yeah, but that's it. Everyone on the inside is like, oh, this is gonna be interesting. But everyone on the outside is just like cheering and thinking this is the next.
Wait a minute, thing. Monty, why are you cool on the Vancouver team? They're the one that everyone thinks is a slam dunk to be good, right?
I mean, I don't think they're going to be 20th, but I don't think they're going to be probably top 8. Let's put it that way. I think that sure they have experience playing goats, but again, like I really think that these players coming to America for the first time, coming late effectively. I'm not sure if they've had good practice coming into the Overwatch League. They certainly haven't been scrimming against the Overwatch League teams that have been here in America. I think it's going to take them a while, just from the organizational standpoint, to set up everything that needs to be set up for these players to be comfortable. And in the meantime, I think they're just going to struggle with adapting to living in America. So
I think at the very least, they'll have a Rust stage 1. Maybe they'll pull it together in the rest of the stages, but stage 1's going to be hard.
Yeah.
By the way, since we were talking about Spark earlier, and obviously, like when some of them, even the Koreans that played in the Chinese region, when they played for that team, Lucky Future Zenith, can I just give a shout out? Because I actually, on some low key level, love when Asians name teams after like English words. Because what's great is like it's the same thing in Korea. If anyone's ever been there, like I've been in Korea in some restaurants, and they would put like quotes on the wall that are made up quotes that just don't mean. Like the thing is, all the words would be correct, but none of them made any sense. Like I always give this story. I used to go to this really good fried chicken place, and on the wall it used to have this quote that said something like, "And the house of a happy chicken was big," and it was like, I sort of know where you're going there. Like, like the feet. I get the sentiment, but none of the words actually confuse me more than the sentiment. So, like the same. What's good about Lucky Future Zenith, Monty, is first of all, I know what all 3 words mean in isolation. Collectively, I almost get it. Because here's the thing. Think about it, right, Monty. If you're thinking of like the future, first of all, Asians are like superstitious. They love luck. They love the idea of like your fortune. And the idea that it's like the world is kind of like not predetermined. Things can happen that crazy. So if you're thinking of like a lucky future, who wouldn't want that? A lucky future. And what not like that? They're picking the zenith of your lucky future. So when you look into your future and you see the best possible scenario, that's where they are. That's baller. In a way, for the most, like, it's the most obfuscated name in the entire league. But if you can understand it, if you get the Rosetta Stone, it's genius. It actually is very intimidating. They're experiencing the prime of their future luck at all times. Are you going to fuck with that?
That's where Scott was. He didn't recognize the lucky future zenith of him getting traded from the Dallas Fuel. So he's just bringing it full circle right now.
Yeah,
I should just go to Spark. Really, that's the obvious next step.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that actually, ironically, that will end up being also one of your potential career pivots if you want, because as you've seen from the players in Hangzhou Charge, Kib and Nero, the future, Custa, is if you can't make it to the top in a Western team, get one of these teams where they're Koreans and Chinese and their shared language is English and just go, well, gentlemen, I believe I'm actually better than you all in this one respect. Yeah, exactly. Speaking English, do it all the fucking time. Some would say I was born to do this.
Yeah,
that's right.
I don't
he'll just become, Custa can just become the mass Scot, right?
Yeah. They don't understand me. All the Koreans and the Chinese people, they don't understand me because of the accent. Like I say like 2 words and then I have to get translated sometimes by, the American players. They're like, oh, this is what he actually said. I'm like, yeah, you guys didn't understand that? And it's just, the accent just burns through sometimes.
Okay. Right, anyway, thanks for coming on this section, Custa. Always nice to talk to you, mate. Cheers. Mate. So for this section, we're going to be joined by Ark, who is obviously a support player for the New York Excelsior. Right, Ark, since you were actually one of our first guests we had on OverSight from the Overwatch League, you were on an early episode, because unlike a lot of the Korean players, you're not scared to come on and talk English and to have some banter and tell us about your team. And also, you can give us opinions that aren't just saying, cheer for me and I'll show good games. So I appreciate real opinions from Korean players. So since you're a real player and you're joining us in this world of, how we talk about teams in esports in the West, Ark, I feel like I can just skip all the pleasantries, introducing the show. All I want to just do is do what's called a classic Thorin style question, which is you just skip politeness, right? So this is the first question, right? I was watching the Overwatch League and I was with Monty. I thought this New York Excelsior team is way too good. They can beat every team. They should win every stage. They're going to win the Overwatch League. And that's why I say I was with Monty. When he started doing badly in there was a few games in stage 3 were a bit iffy. Then stage 4, there was a lot of losses. I thought Monty, they're setting everyone up here. What they're doing is they're geniuses. They're letting these teams win. They're not trying. And then what they're going to do is crush all their hopes in the playoffs, win then, and then everyone else will be like, oh, what chance have we got? The New York Excelsior is too good. And then the playoffs happened. And he didn't win. What happened? the plan was going great until the last step.
It's true. I think we were trying to do something that is not in the meta and trying to counter it, and we kind of failed. Well, yeah, there's all I can say. I think it's not that we didn't try or something. I think it's kind of true that we sandbagged 1 or 2 matches, I'd say.
Yes! My God, man.
We were trying to hide the shit, I would say, more than sandbagging.
But they were saving strats, Monty. They were the one team in history who actually were unironically saving strats for the major.
But that makes sense, right? The whole thing is, and I think what's so stupid about this whole thing is you guys, if I were you, I would have done the same thing. And people think that if you sandbag and you lose, that's not sandbagging, but it is. Just because you were doing it, the season is long. I think you guys, if you had a chance to take a break, the thing is, if you're the best team, when you practice more, the only thing you're doing is making other teams better, right? If you think you have the answer and you're crushing fools, if you play against them, you're just giving your opponents more information. So it totally makes sense to take it easy. Now, it didn't work for you in the end, but that doesn't mean it wasn't done, right? Just because it didn't work doesn't mean that it wasn't the right idea or that, you weren't doing it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I think
you vindicated me, Ark.
I think that his opinion is true that some of our teammates are saying that when your team is dominating, we should not do 3 times the scrims in a day, since we'll give enemies more information. So if you're really good, then we'll have only 2, and others will just have some meetings talking about meta or something like that.
And I think what people don't understand too is, so in a traditional sport, right, you don't scrim against other teams. If you're a football team, you're not scrimming against other football teams. You're playing against your own teammates. You're playing against your B team, right? That's how real sports work. And you only play against opponents really on your match days.
We'll just patch in Bill Belichick to ask if you think that knowing the players of the opponent is actually an advantage when you play them in a real game. So we'll see what his opinion is. He's won a few NFL championships, buddy. I don't know if you wear that.
Yeah, and he knows teams so well that he was fined for like secretly videotaping them. So
exactly, yeah, there is that. So here's another question I have to ask, Ark. So we've also had another member of the New York Excelsior on this show, because obviously we had Wizard Hyung, the coach. Now, he isn't the coach anymore, Ark, but one thing he did on this show, I feel like of every guest that we had in season 1 of the Overwatch League who appeared on our show, Wizard Hyung was actually sort of sneakily the one who came in seemingly the best prepared, because it's almost like he'd written all these, like, it's like he was making a WWE wrestling character, and he'd come up with all the theme. It's like big brain is like my big strength, like big personality, and like he made himself sound so cool to the extent that we believed him, and so we thought, right, he's the genius, he's the one behind everything in New York Excelsior, but he's not with the New York Excelsior anymore. So what is the situation now? Was Wizard Hyung the mastermind?
I think he was kind of genius in some parts. It's like he was really good at analyze, coaching, like person like that. I think he was really one of the best coaches, and well, it's kind of sad that he left, but I think he's gonna do great in Justice too. I think. That's
debatable, but we can all. Okay, let's hope. Okay, let's hope he does well. Yeah, let's hope he does well. I agree. Yeah.
I mean, he might do great in Justice, but like, I don't know what the level of, if he does great with the Washington Justice, what does that look like? Like 15th place? You can only do so much with that roster.
I think they're gonna do like not that good in the first place, but I'm pretty sure that they might come to playoffs in the end of the season, actually. Because,
all right, let's not go crazy there.
Yeah, I think they're like kind of one of the best right now. So as I heard.
Okay.
Really? You think they're one of the best?
In the coaching part, like how they're working right now. Like I don't know how they're good, but their working system is really good. So
the thing is, this will be the team that shows us if Wizard Hyung is a genius at Overwatch. Because I'll give you an analogy, Ark. So in the game I come from is actually the game Counter-Strike, the first-person shooter, and in that game. It was a very small scene, but when esports was much smaller, so I was friends with lots of the players. And one of my friends actually is a person who he works at the moment in Fnatic. He was the legendary leader in Counter-Strike. He was called Khan, right? And he was the in-game leader the whole time, the shot caller, And in his team, he had some of the best players ever. Like one of the players that played for him was the player Forrest, who some people think is the best Counter-Strike player ever. And the way I used to joke with Khan was when he was at his peak, when he was winning all the championships, and he had Forrest as his star player, like when he then later on had teams he didn't have Forrest, he had worse players. I used to joke with him, like, yeah, the thing about you is, I don't know what went wrong with you, Khan. You just stopped being a genius. Like, those tactics you used to have, like, that tactic where you used to tell Forrest to go in and kill everyone? Like, that tactic just doesn't work as well anymore, does it? Like, it's weird because it seemed so genius at the time. And so you get the point I'm getting at here is that, like, when you have the best players in all of the Overwatch League, it's hard to know, is this like a genius move? Is the strategy correct? Or have the players just won this round? So I think we will see on the Washington Justice whether or not this is reasonable.
And it's also true that our teammates were like mechanically one of the best. So I think he also had an advantage of it. It's kind of true. Yeah.
Of course he did. So let's talk about your new teammates. So you've got Flower. Is he going by Flower or Nanohana this season? I think keep track.
Flower.
Okay, he's going by Flower. Okay, it's very confusing because he keeps switching back and forth.
What he did was, when it was not going well in Academy, he was like, actually, better just go to the old alias now. Yeah, that Nanohana guy wasn't doing very well. I can't wait till Flower gets here. Oh, Flower's here, cool. I love Flower, World Cup.
I also love how people are talking about, Flower didn't perform that well in Contenders. He didn't, but he literally had no reason to perform.
No, he was sandbagging. He's an NYXL player. What? Did you guys not keep up with the themes? The narratives are more important than reality. Come on.
Well, he was like injured, right? And then why the fuck would he even try on that Contenders roster? Because he was guaranteed a slot with the Excelsior, and so he was basically in the turn 18 waiting room on XL2. So Nene, also a very good player, but both of these guys have been playing GOATs for a while. I think we can probably anticipate that Nene is going to be taking over Zarya duties for you guys. So how has the new DPS players been with your roster? Why did you guys pick those two up?
I think first, like Flower has, as everybody know, like he was playing Mystery Heroes in the World Cup, so he has a really good hero pool. So I mean, our roster has kind of like have a small hero pool except for Libero before. As you can see, like Pine only playing Widow and McCree, SPB playing Hisken, and Libero has all the hero pools that can cover it. But what we thought in the last season was that like Tracer players should be many characters except for Tracer, even if it's not a Hisken like projectile. So we were like trying to make SPB to play Junkrat last season or something like that. So we were trying to fix it out by changing some roster changes. So we brought the Flower in to give more, obviously, good hero pool. And for Nene, he's actually a really talented player. As you can see in the contenders, he almost made like the finals by himself, I would say. Like he was doing so much shot calls, and well, I was teaming with him when I was in the LWS, so I know him well, and his personality and like intelligence is insane. So we just made him up.
So you think that these guys are going to add a lot more versatility that you lacked in the last season?
Yeah, that's what coaches were saying. Yeah.
Here's the thing though, Ark. Like, if I was the man who owned the New York Excelsior, then I love this lineup because there's so many good players. Almost every position has like more than one good player potentially. Some of the best players in the league. Like even some of the players who are going to be on the bench for some of the games, because you can only have 6 players in the server, are some of the best players. Like that, as we saw with some of the other teams, where London Spitfire, some of those players went to other teams in the league and were really good. Right? If I was the owner, that's the best case scenario. I have amazing players at every position. But if I was some of the players in the New York Excelsior, I might start wondering, like, I don't get to play all the games. I'm just on the team, aren't I? So I want to see Ark play in the New York Excelsior. But the problem is they've got a player called Animo who's pretty good. So will Ark be the starting player for the New York Excelsior?
For this stage, it's hard to say. I would say, like, I will actually have a play time, but not that much, I would say. Actually, like our coaches are trying to fix this too, since like SBB, like all the like players who are not in the starters are, I mean, they're like kind of would have a problem, like what you said, since like they're one of the best players, but how can they in the bench or something like that? So coaches are trying to fix this by like more like coaching for the bench players to become the starters, like being competitive. It's also good for starters since like they can be more competitive since like their backups are really growing up. So yeah.
Is this because is Animo starting because he's like the better Lucio player right now?
I think like he is right now is currently better than me in the shot calls since like
okay.
Yeah, he were like playing goals and like playing against goals from the World Cup. So like coaches didn't want to change the roster that much from them because they had an experience of the playing goals and also against them. So they know how to handle it out better than me. So they just put them in and try to use it more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Shot calling is very important with GOATs because you have to be very careful about your ult management because that's the most important aspect of playing GOATs in general and your ability management. So it makes sense.
Okay. Right. Obviously, Ark, some teams have scrimmed only certain opponents. Some teams weren't even there to scrim. So if, in terms of which teams to talk about, you can tell us if you've played a team, if you know much about them. So can you tell us something about some of the newer teams? Like, for example, have you seen the Vancouver Titans team much?
Since they've come really recently, like 4 days ago, I think, we only scrimmed them once, and I think they're gonna do quite well, but like people expectation is so high right now, so I think they're not gonna make that much, but still they're gonna make it great. Yeah, I would say.
Who is the team?
They're still looking good. You're the only person I know that said they've scrimmed them so far, and you think they were still all right?
Well, they're all right, but I don't know what is happening inside there. Like you will see some like
Okay, get out the chart so you know what it says. And on the west it says, on the left it says Korean, all right. On the right it says terrible, absolutely abjectly terrible, Monty. I can't, and so bad I don't want to talk about them anymore. So, okay.
So here, I was talking to Wolf last night, and Wolf will be on the show later. But he and I were chatting, and he and I sort of agreed that probably it's going to be tough for the Vancouver Titans to adapt, because of the big differences as a whole Korean roster coming over. They have to get used to LA. Do you think that's going to affect them at all?
I think that's gonna affect them too, but I think their major problem is not about adapting LA, but how they're gonna manage their team roster, because they also have a problem that we had last year. Like their roster has kind of doesn't have a big hero pool, I'll say. So,
okay. Who is the team aside from the NYXL? Who is the best team do you think at the moment
in the new roster, or
any team,
or any teams? I think like in Pacific, I think Hangzhou is gonna be really good. And in Atlantic, London, I think I don't like. If they're underperforming, it doesn't matter. They're gonna do great on unless anything happens inside there. Yeah, because they have so much team spirit.
Why do you think in the season 1 Spitfire had times when they were really bad and they were losing to Western players a lot of the time? Even how dare they?
The shame.
But then in the end, they really did get amazing and win the whole league. So what do you think their problem was?
They haven't adapted to the meta, I would say. I think that's the major problem they had.
Have you been practicing against London at all recently?
Oh, we actually had a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling about London coming into this season? Because you said last season they didn't adapt to the meta well. How do you feel about them in the GOATs / whatever triple quad DPS meta this is going to be?
They haven't adapted well yet.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but they're trying, and actually they're improving a lot as the time goes. So they're gonna make it in a time, I'll say. Yeah.
So, okay, in their team, they were one of the teams that were famous for swapping players around a lot, because obviously they had 2 full teams. They had the GC Busan and they had Chengdu Panthera, and they were figuring out which players do we want to keep, and they've let a lot of the players go now. What do you think of the support players in their team? Because last season they had so many and they were switching them in and out game to game within a series. What do you think of this aspect of Spitfire?
First, I think they got Krillin, and except for that, did they have any more roster changes in
Guard
is DPS though. I think they're gonna just try to go with Bidusin and us the whole time and make Krillin to have some playtime to grow up, because he's really young player.
Yes.
And he's just new to Overwatch League, so.
Well, the thing is, logically, with his name, what they'll probably do is they'll send in Krillin first, right? And then he'll try really hard, but he'll lose the first game. And then, you see where I'm going with that? And then they take him out because he's, and then he's sort of warmed up the bad guy for whoever they send in next, which will be NYXL at that point in time. So, logically, it'll all work out. So
this is where Bidosin really needs to change his ID to Goku, so that makes sense.
Exactly. What do you actually think, Monty? Because I know when we were every week on the old OverSight, we used to always talk about that aspect of London Spitfire, that they had a very weird philosophy to trying different lineups all the time and putting players in, and then even if the player worked, seemingly he would just disappear for the next game as though they were getting paid by the game and they had to spread out playing time or something. Because one of the weirdest things is, by the end of the season, wasn't Badosin one of the absolute best supports for you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was definitely he was probably second only to Jonak as a flex support. So yes, he was top 3 easy.
Ark, if we're in a world in which Zenyatta isn't used all the time, is Jonak not going to be as good?
I think he's gonna be good anyway. He's really good at Ana too, so.
How's his DPS? Is he a good DPS player as well?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I would say he's not bad. He's not in the league level. So.
The problem is, if you see him in the lineup at DPS, Monty, I feel like things have gone badly in the NYXL when they have 5 DPS players without the flex tag. At that point in time, If he's pulling a Kareev, it's bad news for everyone.
So in this meta, we're going to see a lot of either flex supports or flex tanks start to play DPS on certain maps. How if Jonak is not the best DPS player, then surely you're going to tell me that Meko is an okay DPS player, right?
Oh, he's improving.
So
My lord.
Don't you see this as maybe a
My
problem
word.
for your team then? Because like you talk about, okay, we have this flexibility of DPS. I mean, that's great. But if in this meta where a lot of teams are probably going to be playing triple or quad DPS, you have to have either your flex support or your flex tank like be a DPS player, right?
Kinda. So
It sounds like you kind of have some DPS players on those roles from what you're saying. Do you think this is a problem for NYXL heading into the season?
I think it's not that much problem, I'll say, since like many other tanks and supports in other teams are bad so it doesn't matter.
So they just have to be less bad than the other tanks and flex supports. That's inspiring. You've inspired me with confidence here.
Okay. What do you think of the Seoul Dynasty lineup arc?
I think, well, I'm kind of worried since like every time they like come into the new season, they're all saying that Seoul is gonna be bad, and if they do bad, then they're gonna get another criticism. So I'm kind of worried for them, but I think they're gonna do better than last season.
So you got your GM now is from Seoul. You guys you ended up with Nugget. How's that going? Like after all the dysfunction of the Seoul leadership in the last season, they didn't.
Well, here's the thing, Monty. I have to say, just as an aside, whoever that guy is, he must have the most amazing PowerPoint presentation that you've ever made. Because if you come in and your resume is, I actually put together the Seoul Dynasty lineup in season 1 of the Overwatch League. It's like whatever you say after that sentence better be amazing. Like you better be, because what you have to basically explain is how you did the right thing and none of that stuff was your fault. So the fact he got through the door, that's a very positive sign there, Monty. This guy clearly has the gift of the gab, as we say in English. So come on then, Ark, what do you think of this change?
Well, why should I say?
Uh-oh. I think that face says enough. Interesting.
Interesting. Well, it's kind of hard to say for that. I think. Like I don't know what to say about it.
Well, probably, he's probably not affecting you that much as a player because he's mostly about, managing the coaches and the organization, right?
Well, he's true that he's actually working with the coaches too, but it's kind of hard to say that he's a bad guy. He was a bad guy in Seoul.
No, I nobody's saying he's a bad guy, Ark.
That was just a joke. That was a harmless joke. Until he does badly, in which case it becomes real. But yeah.
But yeah, I think it was just an issue of like they had too many head coaches on that roster, right? I think there was a lot of indecision, like people not being able to make the right decisions because
Monty, that really was an example of, that like, I can't remember who came up with it first, but I remember I used it in a video when I was trying to explain that like you can't praise everyone, and I used the line that like if everyone's good, then no one's good. It's like the mythology there was like if everyone's the head coach, then no one is the head coach. And really, they proved that rule is accurate, actually, it turns out. So what about this then, Ark? I have a question, which is a player that people who only watched Overwatch won't know is the player Jexe, who's joining the Seoul Dynasty now. Do you know much about this player? Can you tell me what to expect?
Actually, I heard many people talking about Jexe a lot, and I think the last OverSight you guys talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was really interesting since like I knew him for a long time, and like he and I was one of the players who were kind of, thought to have a same play style since like we're like based on like how to manage the ult, like shot calling space, and then playing more passively to counter them. And well, it's kind of like interesting since like in the Apex season back to then, people were like saying that all aggressive Lucios who were not shot calling much was like
was the wrong style, right?
What's the bads
Yes.
they were seeing, and they're now saying that, oh my god, their passive styles are so good. And I'm not saying that Toby's style is bad or something, but I'm just surprised that people's mind was so changing a lot these days.
I mean, I would ask like a funny question, Ark. Like, you know, isn't it weird that if, as someone who comes from Apex, a lot of the players who are on the bad teams are now actually really good. But as you said, you used to play for LW Red. That's just a joke, my friend. That's just a joke. That's just sort of like being mean, but with a good. It's like there's a good intention behind it, even though it's a horrible thing to say. So, what do you think about that though? Because it is weird, right? A lot of the players, even who now are getting added to teams, who, you know, the fanfare is like, hey, this guy's going to be really good. A lot of them did play in Apex, you know, and some of them were in the teams that no one thought, you know, NC Foxes or Conbox or whatever. You know, these teams actually turned out to have good players. Why do you think Overwatch now is so different?
I think the difference is probably that the first is meta changes, and the second is probably because like the last season, who were the contenders player who were in the Apex and who are not in the league were kind of like burning, because oh my god, those players who are working with me or against me were now in the league and getting all the flashlight, and oh my god, I want to be like that too, and they're working so hard and they just came up. I think that's all.
Okay. I've got one question. Yeah, go on then.
Oh, no, I have a question. So we talked about Jackson. So another new Korean support player that's getting a lot of hype is IDK. What do you think about IDK as a player?
He is kind of balanced player, I would say. Like, he is really good at working with the teams, like than other supports, main support, I would say. And I don't know what Chocos he's doing in the team, but their team is really organized. Like I was said, like Hangzhou is gonna be one of the best teams in the Pacific. So I think like his ability would be probably amazing. Yeah, better than other players, like top 3, top 5. I would give it.
Wow.
Are there any Korean players joining the Overwatch League this season who, like, you think are underrated? Like, people just don't know this player, or he's really good, but he didn't have a chance to show in official games yet?
I think first is gonna be DM.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a contenders player and playing main DPS, and people think that he's not gonna perform good. But I think he's gonna do great. But I just heard that Fear is just not gonna be in the league, so I'm just curious about how they're gonna manage to do it. That's just all the worst.
You heard what?
Yeah, that is really bad for them. Like they don't have a backup main tank either.
Oh, right.
So, yeah. I mean, it sounds like he's going to be back eventually. Like he's dealing with some issues that he has to deal with. So it doesn't sound like he's like gone from the team forever. But that really sucks for them.
Yeah.
Have you been practicing against Shanghai? Do you think they're a good team?
I think they were a good team, but
They
right
were.
now,
Right.
it's kind of sad. Like, it's kind of sad to see like DPS player or support player playing tank, like main tank role, because their main tank is sick and they don't have backups.
Yeah, Fearless is a good player, so that's really shitty.
Except for that, I think they're gonna do great. Yeah.
That explains then why some people had them quite high. I noticed a month ago, and perhaps not anymore. Right, okay, before we end this segment then, Ark, we've got a lot of people to talk to. What about this then? If the NYXL is going to win Overwatch League Season 2, what has to be different from Overwatch League Season 1?
Well, I think first, like, burnout problem is gonna be fine. It's just like there's more rest in the season, like between stage 2 and stage 3. And I think about the roster changes problem, I think we're gonna go almost with like fixed roster as long as it's good. And also like, yeah, I think what we should be improving would be probably preparing for next meta, since like we are kind of cheeky after stage 3.
Yes.
So we should be, and try not to sandbag and talk about it.
No, sandbagging can work. I think it was objectively the right thing to do. Like, I don't blame you guys for doing it. I think I would have done the exact same thing. If I were,
I
in
mean,
this-
if you're sandbagging, we should do it secretly. If you do it officially, we'll get
secret
criticism,
sandbagging.
so- Yeah.
No, I think you can publicly sandbag. It doesn't really make any difference. I think you guys absolutely made the right decision. It just unfortunately didn't work.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, thanks for coming on, Ark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Have a-
Right, so next up, we've got Kruise, who is a player for the new expansion team, the Paris Eternal, support player, and he's hailing from the UK. Now, the thing is, Kruise, there has been players from the UK who have been in the Overwatch League. Technically, I mean, I never saw Numlock. I don't know if it was one of those Weekend at Bernie's type scenario.
Come on.
Boombox was there occasionally. That's true, So there were some players. What do you think about joining an expansion team, getting a chance in the Overwatch League? I mean, as far as I can tell, right, in season 1, you were one of the players who was trying to get onto teams, right? It was trialing, it was trying to get a shot. Yeah. What were the things holding you back at that point in time? I mean, to be fair, not a lot of Europeans obviously generally made in the league. There was half and half, maybe.
Yeah, no, my problem in season 1 was I was playing DPS and I switched to DPS at one point from support. But when the trials came along for Overwatch League, I was like, well, what do? Support probably would be better for my career long term, right? Because there's less good support players than DPS players usually, especially in Overwatch. Just more people want to play DPS. And I was half and half at the time. So with my trials, I was like, all right, well, trial me on both. So I wasn't really committed to either. So both of them suffered. And then most people were looking at me for my support. I hadn't played support for 7 months at that time. So my support was really bad. But then I stuck with support and went from now.
I like that, though. Did you see that, Monty? The hubris that he had there. Because on the one hand, right, he acknowledged, he looked at the scene and he was like, there's not a lot of good support players. Maybe I'll just become the best. Fuck it, let's just go. It's other people might go, it's probably really hard to play that role. He goes, nah, fuck it, And then he came in there, he tried both roles, and then when it didn't work out, he goes, fuck. I mean, so he's saying I should have done one role. If I'd only had known.
He's back at the right time too. He can go back to that sweet Lucio meta. Doesn't have to be a mercy bot any longer. It's a great time to be a main support player.
That's how you must know that this guy wanted to be in the Overwatch League really badly. He was willing to go from a DPS player to playing support mercy. You must really want to be a pro player. You have the fire to win. I can see it. I appreciate that. I admire that.
He still plays Lucio like a DPS, though. I mean, he's always been a player that's in people's faces, in the front line, bouncing around, trying to get the big boot plays. You love those, don't you, Kruise?
No, especially now in this meta with goats. It's Lucio's meta, honestly. Maybe you'll see it in Overwatch League. The Lucio's enables so much in that composition. Just the way the boot works, booping the run out in. Lucio's a big part, and it's
and you get to be the big boss too. You decide when you engage. You're the one with the speed boost. So not only you up in people's grills fucking making the plays, you get to tell everybody else when to attack too. You must be loving this.
No, I honestly love playing Lucio. I played DPS for a year, and support now is just as fun, if not more fun. Honestly, I have no problems playing support at all.
What should we expect then from the Paris Eternal? Because obviously, there's a couple of connections. People know, obviously, Soon and Nico used to play back in the day. But this is a team where it's such a new grouping of players. Obviously, the entire team itself never existed previously. What type of team will the Paris Eternal be? I
mean, it's hard to say because, before I go into that, a lot of people are rating us quite low, but ratings are ratings, right? People with preseason, where expectations, where teams will be are always a bit, it's hard to tell, right? But we're on average quite low. I think we're 15th, 16th, 17th. I saw a slideshow said we've got a range of 18th to 12th, and I don't know.
Don't take what that sideshow guy says too much to heart. He likes to throw opinions around.
No, of course. It doesn't really affect us, but it's just funny seeing that. Where I expect us to be as a team, especially in this meta, goats, tanks, we have the staff and the players that have known that meta for so long. Historically,
I agree.
Europe, tanks have always been a big thing in Europe, always, and people like to forget that. And we have Fefe and Nico and Hip, who came from Eagles, who were arguably the best coach team in the world. I played against Eagles, played against South Korea. Eagles were incredible, way better. And South Korea's not an actual team, but made up of the best players in the world, pretty much, right? So it's you can kind of make a comparison there, but Eagles were incredible, and you've got these minds that know tanks so well, and it's just, we've got the players for it, and I don't know, we just fit this meta super well. So if anything, stage 1 is going to be our meta big time, I think.
I agree.
And I don't know. I mean, scrims are scrims, right? You can't like scrim bugs. I saw a lot of people talking about it, but when we got here, our scrims went really well, and they have been going really well. Like honestly, in Europe, we were not doing too great. I think Damon already said it, right? In Europe, we were scrimming the teams and we were going even, sometimes losing. We came here, we were just beating everyone pretty much that we played.
So do you think, like, I agree with you about the GOAT scene in Europe being top tier GOATs, and
you know, by the way, Monty, like, as a quick aside, that is one thing, like, just as like a skit, I wish someone would make a skit where it was like a guy who's like a new Overwatch League owner, and it's like him watching the off season, and he watches the Overwatch World Cup, and he's like, get me that South Korea team, I want them. It's like, sir, it doesn't work that way. Like, no, I want them, whatever it costs. It's like...
So we got the GOATs, you know, from Europe, and you guys got a lot of those players. And I think a lot of people agree that you guys are going to be strong, at least in this meta, due to your experience. Do you think you have made other teams better at GOATs accidentally by like scrimming them? Was that a mistake for you guys? Did you teach the OWL teams? Because remember that a lot of the Overwatch League teams, especially the ones that were all, you know, not the expansion teams, they don't have experience with GOATs because a lot of them have literally never played it because it happened after the season ended. Do you think you've like accidentally made teams good at GOATs that shouldn't be good at GOATs?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I honestly think we have, and it's such a hard thing because I brought it up recently. I was like, maybe we should stop scrimming these teams because they're learning so much from us, and we're not learning much from them. You know, like we're teaching them how to play GOATs, and I felt it big time. Like I said, in Europe when we were playing, we weren't doing so good. We came here, and when we first got here, we were doing super well. Like scrims were, I can't remember who were scrimming, but we scrimmed them a lot of the teams. So we were going like 6-0, 5-1 in scrims, you know. And over time, teams have been getting better and better. Our scrimmage results have been getting, you know, more and more slim, much closer. So teams are definitely improving big time on GOATs, and I would like to think that they've learned from us, yeah. Because going into it, I'd say definitely the best GOATs team here for sure. At the beginning of the first live scrimming, sorry, like for sure teaching teams, and it's hard. It's like, at what point do you stop scrimming teams because you're worried you're teaching them too much? But then, I don't know. It's a hard thing to gauge.
Which of the existing Overwatch League teams actually seem good at GOATs?
Philly are really good at GOATs. Gladiators are good at GOATs. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. People will play like different variations of it. Like it's not just like one set style. Like everyone plays GOATs, but plays their style differently. Like for example, New York play a really, really unique style, and it's interesting to see every team playing differently. Like you'd think one composition like GOATs is quite basic to the like people that don't know it too well, but the way it's played by different teams is quite interesting.
What were you going to say, Monty?
Well, I want to follow up on that. So, like, when you say what are the biggest differences in terms of GOATs variation? Like, what do you think is the biggest thing that differentiates team style? Is it like changing to Winston GOATs, where you change the main tank, or is it like the way that they use abilities?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a bit of both. Like, so you're different. Like, you can switch different heroes around in GOATs, right, to change it a little bit, but even just the way you play it with Winston GOATs and run out GOATs, you can play kind of passive and react to their mistakes essentially. Like you kind of wait them out, force them to make the first move, and then you like react based on that. Or you're always making the first move, always setting up, always going aggressive. It's kind of the two main styles, like a passive version of GOATs and a super aggressive style. But then some teams kind of play in the middle. You know, sometimes they're super aggressive out of nowhere, then sometimes they're super passive, and it's kind of hard to gauge.
So the thing about GOATs, what I was going to talk about earlier, is that in this meta, you know, I've been saying you're probably going to see maybe like 60% GOATs because there are some triple DPS or quad DPS or anti-GOATs comps that are running around right now. But the thing about GOATs is that you have to be good at GOATs in the end, not just because it's 60%, but because it's never really a question of if you play GOATs, it's just a matter of when you play GOATs, right?
Yeah.
Because even if you're playing a different comp, you're probably going to switch to GOATs at some point in time on a map, right? Because you're basically trying to beat them and then force them to use ults and then switch to GOATs to like, you know, and then build up those ults and try and get an ult advantage, right? It's sort of the cycle of GOATs that goes around right now. So I think that for you guys being good at GOATs, like the bedrock of every team has to be, we are good at GOATs. And then we can also do these other things, right? Is that how you would say it would go?
No, for sure. It's definitely GOATs is the main part. Like you have to have some form of GOAT skill in this meta, or you're gonna lose. Like you have to know GOATs.
So besides GOATs, do you feel confident in working on anti-goats compositions? Have you guys been practicing that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like. Maybe people would assume that we're kind of like one trick in tanks and stuff like that, based on like our players and our staff. But no, we've been experimenting with a lot of different comps and having success with them as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of tools in our toolbox, as our coaches say.
Okay. Do you think that if this is the meta that it dominates the first stage, are there teams that were good in Overwatch League Season 1 that at the moment don't look like they'll adapt? Like they don't have either the personnel or they haven't got the style to play at the moment?
I think some teams are like that, but I also think that, like, how do I explain this? Like, a lot of in-goats meta, at least when you're playing, fights last so long and stuff like that it feels like the game's super close when it wasn't. Like, I can't explain. Like, when we're playing the game and playing goats, sometimes it feels like the scrims are super close, and you look at the bot lane and like, okay, that wasn't close at all. So sometimes it's hard to like gauge which teams are better, because when playing it feels like all teams are kind of close, you know? It's like you don't see a Widowmaker popping up killing 3 people, you don't see this, you don't see that. It's more like team play, so it's harder to tell the difference, at least for me when playing. When we look back in VODs, you can see the differences, but I'd say a lot of teams this better are really close. I'd say it's not a lot of teams are like super far ahead. A lot of teams are super below, apart from like 1 or 2, which I don't know if I should say who, but yeah.
No, you definitely should say who. That's the purpose of this show.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably what you expect from last season. Honestly, if you look at the results, like some of the lower teams haven't really got what it takes again.
Okay, right. I did this earlier when we had Custa on, right, where I just did the obnoxious thing where you're like, you're from Australia, he's from New Zealand, tell me more, as though like, you know, it's like his cousin or something. Whereas obviously in theory, I mean, he wasn't even playing in the same region at the same time as that Collar Hex who's on the Boston Uprising now, right? You at least are from the same place as Kib, so can you tell us something about what we should expect from this player? Because obviously he's in a very unique scenario where he's joining this team with all Chinese and Korean players. So
at least you played with him on the UK roster, right? And he was a good Goats player, very good Brigitte in the World Cup, definitely turned some heads. And I asked Guangzhou because Kib wasn't great in contenders in Europe, from my understanding and talking to people, and just talking to Guangzhou, they said, well, we weren't really interested in Kib on his contenders performance, but when we saw how he did at the World Cup, that's when they gave him a tryout, and like he succeeded and got on that roster.
Yeah, like Kib's always like, I mean, recently, of course, he's been a really good teammate in Team UK and stuff like that. He's super dedicated. You always see him playing when everyone's done playing other games, chilling. He's always playing ranked, just looking at VODs, doing all that kind of stuff, which is why I honestly think he's a great brig. He understands how the meta works because he put so much effort in. Like you saw at the World Cup, he was like a key component of why we were so good. Him and Fusion setting up their stun shatters and all that. I think he just works really hard, and I think that's why I like him.
Is that a team, the Charge, that you've played or you know much about?
I played them a few times. Yeah, they're good. They're good. Surprisingly, I think a lot of the expansion teams are really good, and they're going to do better than a lot of the original teams, which people don't expect. They think there's a big gap in. I guess I assume there's a learning curve, right? Like coming from contenders to Overwatch League, but there really isn't, I don't think. I really do think that a lot of these contenders teams are very close to Overwatch League teams. And people seem to think there's this massive difference, but coming from someone that literally just came from contenders, there's not that much of a difference.
I mean, I think that the contenders team actually have an advantage because they, like you're saying, you guys are used to playing Goats, whereas the Overwatch League teams are not necessarily. Yeah. Of course, there's going to be, some players are probably going to choke on stage. It's a different expectation. You've played in Korea, you played in Apex, like you have that stage experience, but a lot of other players don't. Yeah. When we were talking about your tanks earlier, and you guys have 2 main tanks coming in. So why don't you describe, because a lot of people won't have seen these guys, Cloudy or Ben Best. What's the difference between these 2 guys, and how are they playing with you?
I think they have different styles, of course. Like, obviously, why would you get 2 tanks to have the same style? But Ben Best is more of like quite aggressive, and how do I explain their styles? I mean, I'll start with Cloudy's probably easier to explain. Cloudy is very controlled. He always plays kind of like New York, how they always like wait a bit, play passive, and react to the enemy's mistakes, right? Cloudy is a lot like that. He'll play passive, look for opportunities, then go. But Ben Best is the opposite. He's just go, just hold down W, just go in, which is honestly quite useful in this meta in Goats. It fits a lot of our style, I'd say. We're quite in your face when we play Goats.
Okay. Right. Since with some of the other guests, a lot of them, when we just give like open questions, like, who is good of the expansion teams, a lot of them just said the same names over and over again. So, for example, like the Hangzhou team got referenced as being very good. We can ask you about some of the teams we haven't actually talked about at all in the episode so far. So I wanted to ask, like, what do you think? Have you played against the Houston Outlaws team?
Played against Outlaws, yeah.
What do you think of this team going in? Because obviously they're a team that didn't really make kind of many moves in the offseason.
I think when first started coming Outlaws, they weren't great, but they definitely improved a lot, and I actually think they're quite good now.
Like, do they have any? Because obviously, if you look at the roster they have, and like I say, they didn't make many big changes. Like, for example, is their DPS line good?
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. When I think back, I actually don't remember like who was special in that team. It just felt like they were all like collectively playing well together. Like, I can't think of someone that stood out. Like, for example, when you play Atlanta Reign, Defran stands out big time on his Zarya. It's like, well, he's doing so much work for them. When you play Outlaws, it just feels like they're all kind of on the same level, all helping each other. I can't think of someone that's like standing out for them. No, they're just playing well together.
Okay, Monty, do you have any thoughts on Outlaws generally?
I mean, I wouldn't have thought they were going to be particularly strong this season. Especially in this meta, because a lot of the changes that they made, like obviously getting Dante filled their tracer problem, but it doesn't necessarily help them be good at goats necessarily, right? So I guess I didn't have too high expectations for Houston in stage 1 at the very least. So it is somewhat surprising to hear that he thinks that they've improved a lot and are doing well in the meta.
Okay. What about some of the teams, Kruise, where since you're coming over from Europe and there's some of these teams that basically are made up of like contenders Korea teams that maybe you don't have direct experience with except perhaps some scrims now? Like, for example, we didn't talk yet about the Toronto Defiant lineup, which is an all-Korean team. Do you know this team much?
Yeah, I think we actually scrimmed them yesterday, I think, or day before. Yeah. Played them recently. They weren't anything special, honestly. I feel like they weren't that standout now. At least now.
Do the Korean teams like that, where they're coming over from Korea, do they have a different read on the meta, do you think?
Yeah, I really do believe that Korean teams aren't so great at this meta. I mean, I'm sure they will improve playing teams that adapt, but I think right now, Europe has the strongest understanding of the meta. And as we're coming along and that information is spreading, teams are improving. And I do think that Korea will catch up very quick because of their coaching staff. They just have incredible staff, and they will catch up from that. But I think just currently, right now, or at least a week or two ago, when the meta was a lot more fresh for them, when scrims just started, they were not in a good position, most Korean teams now. But I do think they'll catch up.
When you said earlier that, like, obviously in the power rankings, people had your team pretty low, right? In theory, that doesn't sound like they're doing it purely off, like, the roster on paper. Like, do you think that, like, as you said, since when you guys were practicing in Europe and it wasn't going so well, is that just like you built up a bad rep, do you think, with the other teams or something?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because it may be, but I'm not sure if that was even public knowledge. Like, we were like going close to some of the like Angry Titans, Giganti, and stuff like that in Europe. I'm not sure if that was. Not sure people knew that. I'm not sure if that affected it. I really think that the reason we're getting rates so low is because people are kind of unfamiliar with the players on our team, at least some people, and like the staff, like Saturn and stuff like that. Like, a lot of people don't understand their history and how great they actually are and how much they know about this meta. And then I guess people just assume that these Overwatch League teams will just adapt and learn quicker. I'm not sure. I really don't know we're being rated so low. I guess because we're an expansion team, honestly. A lot of the expansion teams are quite low, apart from, I guess, Runaway, because they're an existing team.
I mean, I think that most people in the know in Overwatch, when we talked about this on the last episode with Demon, rank Paris's coaching staff is really top tier. And Seda, yeah, I know, was one of the most talked about names behind the scenes as a coach coming into this season. And the reason why people couldn't get him is because he won't leave Finland. So he's remote coaching for you guys, right? He's not in Los Angeles. Yeah. So but he is definitely very highly rated among people behind the scenes. So I think the combination of you guys getting all of these coaches together who have a lot of unique strengths is pretty damn good. Yeah,
say it is honestly incredible. A lot of people going into it are saying, like, how's it going to work with him remote coaching? Like, how can that work? But it works really well with Seta. Seta, I don't even know where to start with Seta. He's, at least in Europe, he's quite a legend. Everyone in Europe knows who Seta is, just based on scrimming against him and stuff like that, he's always on time of everything. When VODs end, he'll post a link 5 minutes every single day on the dot when scrims end to do the review. He's always on time of everything. He has a spreadsheet for everything you can even want. It's just everything with Sato is just professionalism, and it's just, I don't know.
What's your favorite SATA spreadsheet?
Favorite SATA spreadsheet? I don't know. I'm pretty sure he has a spreadsheet for. We have like it's called SATA DM, where before the game we have like a deathmatch with. He's changed the heroes, so Tracer has unlimited. Like she can keep shooting forever and runs faster. The Torbjorn can fly. Reinhardt can fly. Like he changed all the heroes, and then he keeps the stats of how well people are doing in that, and there's a spreadsheet for that, so you can see who's the best. That's probably my favorite. I don't
That's
know.
pretty
Like,
good.
That's cool. All right, I like that.
Yeah.
That's
because that's one of those areas that I always wonder about is like, as people talk about the concept of infrastructure, people think that just means you get a chef and you get a sports psychologist, etc. But one thing that's actually underrated in esports games, which I'm amazed, Monty, that so many people have overlooked this aspect, is there have been esports games. A notable example actually was StarCraft Brood War, the original one in Korea, where one of the things people did to improve was along these lines. Like they did like customized trainings. So for example, in StarCraft Brood War, famously, if you were a Zerg player, they had like a map where you could just practice the Mutalisk, which was the air to ground based attack unit. And the idea was just to practice your micro with that. You have a map where that's all you do. You're just a Mutalisk flying around doing that. And I know in certain FPS games, people did similar things. Like they would make a map where it was like, they had no textures and you could only see the bot that you were fighting. So the idea is you'd learn like your tracking aim or whatever. That's what I wondered about Overwatch, because since the game itself, it isn't built up so sort of like flowchart style like League of Legends or something is. It's very difficult to practice certain scenarios over and over again. So I'm interested actually to see who can ever develop any tools like this to have an effective practice in a certain sense, that's not a real game.
Well, what I like about this is that, based on his description, players will always fall into certain patterns or habits when they play like Tracer, right? So if you change the rules of playing Tracer, like he's saying, in a way, it forces players to think about actively how they're playing that hero again, because the rules of it has changed. So they can't like fall into those habits. Or if they are falling into those habits, it becomes much more obvious, because you could really see, I think, a player's tendencies when you just like shock them with something new and force them to play it, because they're going to be very instinctual. So I really like that kind of adaptation. How has this helped you, Kruise? Like when you play these maps, what have you learned about your own play?
I mean, honestly, like a lot of it is just for fun. But going back to what Thorin was saying earlier, we early on when we first started the team, we actually would start the first fight of goats over and over again. We would do the first fight, restart the map. First fight, restart the map. We'd do it over and over again so we can perfect how we go into first fights, so we could get that down perfectly. Like you just don't start the game properly, you just go into like a custom game, and then that was working really well. So that's what you were talking about before, like perfecting certain things. Yeah, we did that a bit, and I think that was the first time I ever did that. I think that was Sita's idea. It was really useful.
Fair enough. Right, what about this then? As like our last topic for this segment, who do you think is an underrated lineup for Overwatch League Season 2? Because as you said, it's so hard to gauge. At the moment, most people are just hyping teams, but there's not really any that are like... there's some teams that just never get talked about. So who for you is underrated? Like who's really good, but maybe they don't get the props?
Underrated... I'm honestly not sure who's underrated. I'm not sure. Is Spark being rated lowly? I'm sorry.
No. Spark's the most highly rated team thus far. Like they're the one where even if you don't ask a name, everyone says them first. So who else?
Let me think. Wait, is Shock being rated low?
No one really mentions the Shock, I noticed.
Shock are good. Shock are really good.
And are they a team where, since they've got like 1 million players, do they actually show like a lot of different lineups? Do they stick with a similar core?
I mean, I'm not sure, but I think they messed up. I'm not sure if it's an actual strategy, but I think they messed up. They double booked a scrim, and they had the whole NA lineup playing and the whole Korean lineup playing on different scrims. So we were playing against the NA lineup, the Korean team, the whole Korean team. I think they had Architect on Lucio or something. They all played because I think they double booked. They didn't want to cancel either. So.
Okay.
But,
I was actually there. I was there the day they did that. It was pretty funny. I'm glad you told that story, not me.
Wait a minute. Yes. So this was like an accident, though, that happened, because that makes it sound like like that's like if someone who was in a band was like, "Oh, fucking Whammer playing," and you're like, "Oh, I can't wait to see." Oh, wait, it's not George Michael, it's the other guy. Shit, like why is the whole NA lineup?
Yeah, I think it was an accident. I think they double booked and didn't want to cancel on either because they don't want to have
Right.
bad relationships with that team. But yeah, it was a fun time. But yeah, no, Shock are really good. Snatch Cesare is insane, and they just play well together. I don't know. For me, it's kind of hard to tell who's the standout players in Goats because it's so team based, right? And you can't tell who's calling the shots because whoever's calling the shots should be the standout player because Goats is so strategy based. There's calls all the time to out rotate, do this, do that, do this. It's very complicated calling Goats. So I'd say the shot callers in Goats are the standout players, but it's hard to tell who the shot callers are, right?
So, are you the shot caller on Paris? Who's doing most of it?
Yeah,
It's hard for him to tell.
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell, but yeah, me and the main tanks. So me and Claudio, me and Ben.
Okay. Monty, was it actually ever implied with this Shock lineup that they actually might have what he just described? Actually, basically, there'll be a line of Korean players that play on a certain style and a line of NA players because they do have a team that you technically could make from both sides. So it's even if it's not actually planned right now, I can already tell you. I'm just going to go ahead and say this. When you've got a lot of Korean players and you've got Korean coaching staff, just if you're in this team, right, if you notice they keep sort of going out of the room and having conversations outside, maybe they'd spend a little bit too long smoking that cigarette, I'd watch you back. I'm just saying, this could turn real fast. I mean, I know they're not all ex-Mighty AOD players, so it's not as obvious as that, but I'd watch out if I'm like Super or something. Why do they need to talk to Smurf right now? What's going on exactly?
I think I don't actually think Krusty's like that. As a coach, just from his time on Boston, now his time on San Francisco, I think he values a lot of the Western players that he has. Otherwise, he wouldn't have, I think, kept many of them around for this season. Also, just factually, they're not going to be able to do that because Violet is suspended for a few games at the start of the season, so they're going to have to play Sleepy at least at first, at the very least, and they only have one main support player, even though Kruise just said that they were playing against Architect on main support or whatever with this all Korean lineup. So I think Moth is probably going to be in for the majority of the game. So I don't think it's going to go that way. I also think it's probably important to the Shock's management to continue to groom their younger players like Super and Sinatra, and I think both of them are solid. So I don't think it's going to go that way. I don't think so.
All right, thanks for coming on this section anyway, Kruise.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Overwatch League.
Thank you. It was fun.
Right, we're back, and our guest for this section is going to be Wolf, who, if you were one of the people who watched Contender's career, so fucking hell, I've already just that filter's just whacked so many people out of the call already. What the? Oh yeah, sort of. Haha, I like Element Mystic, looking nervously. So anyway, some people did who were cool. Then you already would know who Wolf is. But otherwise, if you don't, if you're just an absolute pleb, then he has just joined the Overwatch League. So you definitely know about that, right? You know about that big Overwatch League thing? You know that thing?
I don't. I mean. The Overwatch League is where the esports fan clubs are, so to be fair.
Sure. Which, by the way, makes perfect sense. It's a brand new game. It's a brand new league. They're trying to appeal to a mainstream audience. Yeah, all these things make sense,
Yeah, there's not a ton of crossover between the two. The Korea viewers are the hardcore. The OWL viewers are a little bit less so.
You have to realise, we come from the world back in other games where if it was oh my God, look at this, Pringles has done a bag with a StarCraft character on, holy shit. Whereas now it's just actual Coca-Cola sponsors the league.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not bad little progression. So, okay, here's the thing, Wolf. We've left you with the easiest task of everyone who's been on this mega episode. Because everyone else, right, we would ask them really difficult things like, is their own team good? Do they think that this player at their position is better or worse than them? Does anyone know how to play the GOATS meta? All the really in-depth, really difficult stuff. So we've got the easy questions for you, which is, please explain all of the Korean players that nobody knows and how they're going to do in the Overwatch League. So, but, I guess you probably want specifics. So if we can go by a few teams, for example, Monty earlier on said actually he's not feeling the Vancouver Titans that much. Now,
I was relaying our conversation we had last night, Wolf, where you and I were talking, and you thought they would struggle adapting to Los Angeles, and I agreed with you.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely going to be, especially because they're coming to LA so late, a certain level of adaptiveness that has to be built. The staff that's working with them is going to have to take care of them and make sure that they end up adjusting well and most Korean teams, when they move out here, have like a chef that makes Korean food and stuff like that. I haven't been able to see the house or what their setup is yet, but just time-wise, because I've been here for such a short period, that's going to be a struggle. As far as I know, some of them hadn't even left the country before this trip, so that's going to be a bit of a shock. It's very different here than it is in Seoul. And I've only been here for like 3 days, and I'm already, still like adjusting myself, even though I'm technically an American citizen. I've, lived most of my younger years in the States. So to never leave the country and to...
So he goes technically an American citizen. Like, there's no technicality involved. You are entirely an American citizen. Like, I don't know how far you're going to go with this, but like, we always used to make fun of like LS, Artosis for like pretending to be Koreans. Like, you were never at any point Korean just because you were over there casting games.
No. Yeah, sure. I'm just saying,
I get what you mean, sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean. But in terms of the roster overall, though, I mean, I think we do have to. We can't say we can't judge Vancouver, make predictions based on they'll probably be not used to LA, right? I think that's something that's going to factor into it, and I think we're going to know in the first 2 or 3 matches they play how much of an impact that's going to make. Like if they come out of the gates in their first match against Shanghai Dragons and totally smash them, and are laughing and looking great on stage and having a great time just like they did back in Korea, then I think we lower our feelings about okay, how are they adjusting? Because they're a really good team overall. They're really good at goats, which is how they obviously won their title basically at the end of Contender Season 2, and then goats started to become the meta in Season 3 across the world. So they're very, very good at that. And a lot of people are questioning whether they'll be good at running non-goats meta. But I think that they have Hureg on their roster. They have Stitch obviously as well, so really good range DPSs. But they also have Hoxel, so they can play dive. Now Runaway's old style that they were the best at, before they became Vancouver Titans, just to make that connection there. Same team, but no longer the new Runaway. When they were the old Runaway in Apex, they were the best dive team for a long time.
New Runaway.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, what about this then? Have the Seoul Dynasty made the pickups that will actually make them a good team?
I think the best pickup they got for sure was Jexay. And he was, for those who don't know, the Lucio player for Ella Mystic. And he was by far the best Lucio in Korea for a really, really long time. His shot calling from, what I saw back in Korea was really good as well. Really good at communicating, really good at avoiding EMPs, controlling high ground, knocking players off with right clicks, and just basically controlling the space of the game. And the pace of the game, really, whether he's knocking someone off a high ground or getting everyone up to where they need to be with goats or with a dive composition or blocking EMPs from Sombra. He's very spatially aware of where the team needs to be, where the enemy team is. And if they're in the wrong spot, how to communicate, we need to move away from this high ground here because we're going to lose it, or this EMP is coming in soon, so I'm going to hang back so you guys aren't going to have heals right now because I'm hiding behind this wall, et cetera, et cetera. So he's the player I look at for Seoul as the big safe pick. This was not a risky pick, whereas players like Michelle and Marvel, not necessarily as strong of pickups. I mean, Michelle is an okay player. Marvel was a really good main tank on all the teams.
But you also have Fissure
against.
and Gunba, so it's not like they don't have options.
Sure. And then Fitz is the big question mark because everyone is talking really big game about Fitz. I've only seen him play a little bit, and he seems a little bit stage shy. And a lot of the players on Seoul Dynasty did when I cast their match against the Charge when they had that Pacific Challenge match. So it's going to take some time for some of these players, even like Marvel and Michelle, who haven't been able to play on a big stage like this, to adjust to a big crowd. And Seoul Dynasty's fans are some of the most critical fans that we have in the league. They get very angry about losses and love to go on Twitter and social media and attack the players and the coaching staff. So
that's one of those things. That's actually one of those things that we didn't really get that much in Overwatch League Season 1. Obviously, people might remember with the Robin 711 or whatever his name was, there was a lot of translated info and a lot of good info came out of the Korean scene. But one thing, if you're a Western viewer, I know this from Korean esports, is Korean esports on their forums are savage as fuck. Like if you ever go on like the Inven one or back in the day in League, it was like DC Inside or whatever. Like people are brutal the way they've criticised the players there, especially because it's easy to dismiss criticism that sounds ignorant, like, you know, like, oh, you just shit at the game. It's like you can just ignore that. The guy that'll torture you is the one who actually like attempts to like analyse the game. He's given like fucking 10 paragraphs long, like breaking down all the things you're doing wrong. It's like those are the worst ones to read. So were Korean fans like kind of outraged that the team that represented Seoul was? I mean, they were never like the worst, but they were generally underwhelming.
Yeah, they certainly were. The thing about those websites too is they're very similar to Reddit in that you get like upvoted comments, and the top upvoted comment is exactly like the one that it's like
captures
the
zeitgeist or whatever.
Yeah, but it is like a guy who like breaks down like game 1 to 4 everything they did wrong and like makes memes and like puns and stuff the whole way through, and he's like killing it because he's got to get his karma on Inven or DC Inside. And those are always the comments you see at the top where you're like, oh god, yeah, I know I had a bad day. You know, I know I messed up my ult timings, or you know, I wasn't hitting the headshots on Widow. And you, of course, naturally as a young pro gamer, go on to Inven, which you should never do, but they always do.
Of course,
they're all tabbing into Inven after their Apex losses, man, on the OGen computers refreshing.
I know. The players always make that mistake. They're like, I hate Reddit, while they're like looking at Reddit and like, maybe you shouldn't do that.
Well, that's actually also the other thing about that setting that I always find kind of bizarre. Is like players themselves, before they were top pros, must know like the scenario of like, well, you can just post anything on the internet, and then they come on themselves like, what? People are saying things that hurt my feelings? Why? It's like, it was you about 10 minutes ago. If I asked someone who wasn't in the league, like, what do you think of Ria Jehong the last few months? They'd be like, oh, it's absolute shit. And then they're like, when they become a pro, like, what? How can they call a great player shit? It's like, yeah, the mechanism's difficult to understand, isn't it, when you're not a pro player. Like, here's the question though, Wolf, is with this Seoul Dynasty team, like, one thing I would say, like a skill that seems unique. I didn't think this was unique, but me and Monty both have this skill. It's like almost like a superpower, right? Are you ready? We're capable of liking someone, but then not having to think they'll succeed at video games. It's fucking crazy. It's so nuts, I know. Like, for example, believe it or not, I know this will sound crazy, but when Monty predicts the best Korean team to win, that's not because he wants the US Constitution to be destroyed. Like, there's not even a connection. Like, forget even like a passive connection. There's no connection at all. So what I'm saying here, basically, Wolf, is, like, if I had to describe my feelings about the Seoul Dynasty, it would be a picture of a man with really shit, shaggy hair, and it would be like, I want to believe written around it with the classic UFO saucer poster, right? But the problem is, I can't believe. Like, I just can't. So, do you think does this team become good?
I don't think we can predict that right now. No, like I think that everyone predicted Seoul Dynasty to do well in season 1. We were all very wrong about that. But I don't think we can safely predict that they're going to be a great team this season. I think they're going to be middle of the pack most of the time. It depends on what meta we end up settling on, because I think a lot's going to change after round 1. And you know how that evolves and what patches come out, what new heroes come out. Maybe they excel in a new meta, but in terms of just straight up 3-3, I mean, I've cast this team already. I'm unique in that regard, and they were pretty okay, but nothing special. I think the big standout for me when I watched them play against Guangzhou Charge was that Jaehyung's Zenyatta was really good, and his timings for Transcendence and his positioning and overall damage output, like, that was really impressive.
Boy, there we go. See, it's like, because I told him, I want to believe. He's like, right, feed him the lies, feed him the propaganda. Well, you know, I'll just drop this little piece of info. Yeah, Ri Jaehyung's fucking god, like on Zenyatta. All right, well, when you put it like that, oh boy.
Yeah, you know, going back to liking people, you know, I really do love the owners of Seoul Dynasty, KSV. I think they're really awesome people, and I think that they're doing a lot in terms of trying to make sure that their players have excellent conditions, but they also have this tendency to throw too many people at problems, which is what sort of, I think, stopped the Seoul Dynasty from being as good as they could have been last season. Not to mention, obviously, their player issues at main tank and everything that also was problematic. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because I like them doesn't mean that they're going to be a hugely successful team. I think they'll be okay this season, and I like some of the additions that they made with Fissure and Jexay, but I don't think they're going to be a top tier or even a playoff team.
If
I
someone thinks of the impact that Fissure had when he went to the Gladiators, and obviously because of the contrast of the team before him, the team after him, he was an MVP candidate for some people. Some people thought he was the best player in the league. In the current meta, can he have that kind of impact on a team like Seoul? Is that possible in the current GOATS meta?
I think he can. I mean, I think he's a really good Reinhardt player, and that's pretty essential at the moment. We'll see for how long. That might change in a few weeks. But my concern with Fissure is how good is his relationship with the players. He's bounced through a lot of teams. He's been a very outspoken guy on both Twitter, as you guys definitely know, but also on even like the BattleNet forums. He's made like big and long posts. He's a very aggressive personality. And
wait a minute, there's pro players who are going on the fucking BattleNet forums. Why are Koreans like this? It's like when I found out back in League of Legends that people used to go on the actual League of Legends forum who were like pro players. That's all for plebs, what are you doing? Have you heard of Reddit? What are you on about?
I think it was right after maybe Apex Season 2 or Season 3, he posted like a long letter to Blizzard or something like that. I'm pretty sure that was what was on the BattleNet forums. And it got translated. It's really old now, but anyway, I don't know how he's going to do on a team that has a lot of egos, and I think that he's probably one of those players his ego is going to clash with some of the other more experienced players on this roster. I don't know how well they're going to gel. I haven't, been able to spend a lot of time with them or anything like that to say for sure, but I do have concerns about that. Is he a great Reinhardt player? Is he going to be really strong on this meta? Absolutely. But that only matters if you can work as a unit with your team really well and everyone's always communicating well, everyone's on the same page. And I just don't know if we could trust that Fissure will even be on this roster after stage 2. Who knows? He might get traded to another team again. I don't know if we could really be sure he's going to stay on this roster.
That's true. The problem with Fissure is, he is a man's man. He comes in, he just does what he wants. He's got the swagger, but, much like many men like that, can be very aloof. Suddenly they just disappear. They go out for a pack of cigarettes. Next thing you know, it's 20 years later. Where you at? He's like, listen, you can't keep this Rolling Stone tied down, baby. I had to hit the road. Basically, Fissure is sort of like his career would be the music video for the song Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd. So, if you look into the meaning of the lyrics, so that's at least in my mind. That's what starts playing with the 70s style fade on the screen. What about this then? So another of the teams that I actually am interested to know about is what you think of the Toronto Defiant.
Okay, so I haven't seen any scrims of them yet. I'll just put that out there first because I know a lot of people have been tweeting they're thinking the scrims have been going poorly and whatever. Right. I'm really familiar with all of these players, and a lot of them are very unknown players to most of the West. I look at this roster on paper and I think this is a really good roster. Every single one of these players is an absolutely stellar player. I've always been a big Neko fan.
Some literally, yeah.
Well, he's not going to be eligible for the first few games.
Yeah, that's true. I've always been a huge Neko fan, though, and I've been pretty adamant about that for a while. But even Aid is quite good. Roki has been basically inactive for a really long time, so I have questions about how good he's going to be because he was basically on the bench for X6 for forever. He was the guy who brought the snacks and coffee to the team most of the days. And I was like, are you on this team still? But yeah, he was inactive for a really long time, but he was really good when he was playing. And then you've got Ivy, who's so good at so many different heroes. His Pharah, his Genji, his Junkrat, especially projectile, he is so good at that. And if we're talking about potentially quad DPS and triple DPS comps coming through, Pharah, really important in that, and I think he's going to do a really good job at that. Stellar as well. These two players actually kind of swap between each other on O2 a lot of the time. Where Stellar was playing Sombra, when they're running non-Sombra comps, they'd swap Ivy in, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more Sombra coming forward. And now they're both able to play as starters and fill different roles. In general, I think this team is going to be like, I think this team could be better than Seoul Dynasty, for example. I don't think they're going to be like a top tier team. Like, we can't predict that, but I think this team has a lot of potential because a lot of these players have already played together before, and this roster was built a long time ago. So, I mean, not a long time ago, but, in esports senses, like, they've had quite a lot of time to scrim and practice together. I think eventually this team is going to start surprising people and start really rising up through the rankings. Like, I don't think they're going to have the greatest start because it's going to take time to adjust and stuff, but I think people are sleeping on them too much. Like, I think people are putting them all their beds down at the bottom with Paris and Washington and Chengdu and stuff. But I think they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of what their potential is this season.
Sure. Monte, I was actually, when he was in the Boston Uprising, a fan also of NYXL. Like, I thought he was one of the players who really showed himself to be like a revelation in season 1. And then what really secured like my eternal admiration was obviously when he called Hawk a bastard in the off-season. Because normally we joke, like, when we had Ark, like, it's so hard to get anything out of Koreans, and then this guy just like completely unsolicited just went on like whatever the Korean forum was, just called him a bastard, a liar. Like, that's so wild, it's unreal.
Do you know which Korean word he used for that, Wolf?
If you had a link to the tweet,
I could link you to the thing.
Oh, I mean, I could read which one. I was just curious which version, like how that was translated, because
I didn't actually see the Korean version. Actually, I just saw the translations on Reddit the next day, so I don't have an answer.
Because it was probably Seki, right?
Yeah, okay. It probably was.
Which is sort of worse than bastard.
Yeah, Seki is a weird word because it kind of means like baby, like, but like an animal baby, like a baby dragon would be called like a Seki, for example. But it's a really insulting word because it's like basically calling an adult a baby. Like, but it's kind of like bastard or asshole at the same time. And you don't use it in context of like he's actually calling this person a baby, but I guess that's like kind of the evolution of the word somehow.
That's like the harsh Korean version of being like, child, please. That's basically what NYXL was like. Because Huck was like, there's a lot of problems in the team. They were sort of like being insubordinate. He's like, child, please. Here's the thing, Monty. What do you actually think the realistic expectation is for the Defiant lineup? Because I kind of agree with Wolf. Like, on paper, it looks good, but I noticed it is suspicious.
I think they're going to be worse than
it's
Wolf
suspicious that there's feels like there's almost no one in the scene has them as a top team. Like, I haven't really seen many people who had them high up on any of the rankings.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be. I think that they'll be lucky to be in the top 12. Like, if they even have a shot of like the play-in making playoffs, I tweeted this the other day, Thorin, but we really haven't talked about it a lot. Is that something that flew under the radar was sort of the format changes for the season playoffs with Overwatch League, because they announced it as part of the schedule, but everyone was talking about the schedule and not about the actual format. So what they did is at the end of the season, the top 6 teams all make the playoffs, and then the teams that are in 7th through 12th place, instead of stage 4 finals, there's a play-in tournament where those teams compete for the 7th and 8th playoff seeds, which I think is amazing because
that's really good.
It's super good. It means that if a team is 12th, but they're having a very good stage 4, that they can still technically get into the playoffs. And the other thing that they changed was, I actually liked the playoff format last year as well, which was the best of 3 of best of 7s. Or, what I mean, where it's like you had to win multiple on multiple days, but they changed it. So now it's just best of 7s, but it's double elimination bracket.
Right.
So that's also a great change. I mean, I could take it or leave it because I thought that the vetting system was robust enough where you had to win multiple best of 7s in order to like win a series. But at the same time, that was also difficult in scheduling because you don't know if you're going to play like 2 or 3 of those series. So I understand why they would change it to double them.
You also play against the same team in that best of 3 of best of 7s, and you're adjusting on a day-to-day basis. Whereas if you go double elimination, at least you get some time to like adjust and play against a different squad, then kind of come back and get another chance against that team after you've had the chance to kind of take some time and think about how you lost them and what your weaknesses were. It's a bigger, like more forward-thinking, I think, type of evolution of the format. the old format's basically what the Pro League format was for like round finals, where you'd have these best of series that happen like one on each day.
So Thorin, I know you're a big double elimination fan. How do you feel about these changes?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, even though some of the really old games I used to follow, like in the beginning of Counter-Strike, it used to use double elim, and Quake actually famously often used that format. Because for so long in esports, once it like solidified and got professionalized, single elim was just the de facto for pretty much every big game. Like, I initially thought I was kind of like split, like, you can have either a really good single elim format, like you usually need good seeding for that, obviously, and something like, if it's, depending on what the game is, like a big structure, best of 5, best of 7, you don't want like a short format for that, obviously. I thought to myself, there's like an upside to that. But to be honest, having watched modern day games, like Dota's a very particular one that's had a lot of double elim tournaments. I think double elim is actually superior, because the key element that you get with double elim that you don't get with the single elim is the idea that you can adapt between series. Like, I can play you, lose to you, and I might beat you in the final. Now, what's funny is I noticed that this is where it's different if you're a fan who just watches the game as a casual fan, since to them the narrative isn't as satisfying, because they're like, but I lost to you, but now I beat you and I win. Like, they think that doesn't make sense. To me, as a fan of the strategical side of games, that makes way more sense. That's amazing. Yeah. And in fact, the interesting detail is, from watching games, like, actually, I'll give you a quick example, which is in Dota, the team that really changed my mind on this topic was one of the teams that won a lot of tournaments a few years back, was the North American Evil Geniuses team. And this team won the majority of their tournaments from the lower bracket, because that was exactly what they would do. They might lose to you in the upper bracket, so in a single elim, they'd be done already. They'd have gone out 58th or something. But the idea is, they were the best team at making like the adjustments between series, like figuring out what they did wrong, like, let's throw that out. If we play them again, here's how we'd attack them. And they were able to literally make almost like a reputation off that. So I'm very interested in a game like this, where the entire meta can switch for the playoffs, or, teams are coming in, one team's got his seeding because he was so good for the first 3 stages. The other team's crept in, but maybe they were super hot coming through the qualifier, like you say. If you give double elim as the actual playoff format, you're going to get like a really good sense of who the good teams are in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think some people will also be a little bit weirded out, because obviously by the time you get to the grand finals, there's no people will say there's no advantage for coming in as the winning team, but the advantage to coming into on the winner side of the bracket is that you play fewer matches. Like, you give less tape to your opponents, you don't have to prepare for as many matches, you get to rest before the finals. So I think that it is very valuable still to be in the winner side of things, and it's enough of an advantage without having to reset the bracket like they do in the FGC double elimination tournaments, and or have like a game advantage, which I also think is lame in a grand finals. So.
Yeah, the game advantage thing is lame in the grand finals. We had that in Heroes of the Storm, and it always felt also confusing to people who didn't really follow what was happening before, as to why is one team, have a 1-0 and game 1 or whatever. It's a little bit whack. I completely agree, though. I think the less games you play, especially in a super strategic game like Overwatch, is very, very important. As was kind of indicated yesterday, how little the teams wanted to show in the community countdown.
By the way, Thor, were you following that at all?
Yeah, I saw people will go. Here's all you need to know, Monty. As usual,
do you want to go on the rant so Wolf and I don't get fired?
Well, no. Here's what happens. Right? So what I like
here and we're not going to nod. Wolf.
What I like about
here and just like let Thorin rant. Okay.
What I like about Overwatch drama is, here's how Overwatch drama usually happens. Cause on Twitter I only follow like reasonable people, like pro players or the journalists that I like. I get like the filtered down version. So I always get the reaction to the fucked up thing. So I always get the response. So what happened was, people on my Twitter were like, yeah, I understand teams aren't playing these games properly, but it's a sort of an official scrim basically. Therefore, some people obviously choose to not play properly because they don't want to give too much away. Now, I just thought, yeah, reasonable point. Actually, I think we can all agree upon that. Oh, well, just open Reddit up. Oh, the world's burning again. Oh, the sky's falling. It's the end of the world, and we're all going to be dead from, I don't know, fossil fuels within about 2 years. So, like, why is it always like that? Why is the response? Because I just remember seeing that thread that was like, this is unacceptable. It's like, what? It's free. It's just some off-season shit. What are you talking about? How could you get outraged at that? Come on. This is like, if you went to see you know, if you go to see a stand-up comedian, obviously you go for the headliner, right? But he's going to bring along some guys before, isn't he? Some like guys to open the show up. That would be like going in and then one of them's not that funny. You're like, this is unacceptable. I paid for a ticket to come to this thing. It's like, shut up. The main thing's coming. Like, that's not even the thing to complain about. Why are you getting mad now? Like, what did everyone really think was going to happen? That we were going to have the most epic games ever in these fucking like just like exhibition games or whatever. It's not fucking Rocky 4. Like, Apollo Creed doesn't get killed by someone in a fucking exhibition match, does he? Grow up, will you?
Thank you.
Also, to be fair, Monty, how was anyone able to get mad? Like, logically, sandbagging doesn't exist. Oh, what's that? Everyone's sandbagging. Oh, well, everyone's changed their tune now, haven't they? Fucking hell.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's all right. Right, anyway, like, Wolf, what about this? Since there's a lot of players coming in, some of them are on good teams, some of them aren't. Like, who would be some players who you think have flown under the radar? Like, who's coming from Korea who's like good, but you haven't seen any hype or any buzz around this player?
One of the players I want to talk about is Yeon-joon, who's on the Shanghai Dragons. He's a really, really good flex player. He's played so many different heroes, from Doomfist to he's played the Brigida, he's played McCree on Hitscan, he's played some Pharah. He has a massive hero pool. You could kind of liken him to Libero, who kind of came in with a massive hero pool. He's more of a dive-oriented player than projectile, though, I'd say, and more hit scan when he flexes onto that than, say, the Pharah, for example. But he's a really good Brigida player, and that's kind of how he started. But as we learned, throughout the entirety of the regular season and Season 2 of Contenders Korea, he's got a lot more in his wheelhouse. And every time he's swapped, we were wondering, like, how is this going to go? We haven't seen him play X hero yet. And then every time he just totally crushed with it. And then the next time we saw him do it, there were no doubts. So he's someone that I think people should look out for. I think, generally speaking, the Shanghai Dragons, I'm just looking at their roster after I started talking about Yeon-joon, like Koma, also very, very good player. Luffy, super underrated. He's had a long history on Chengdu Panthera, even going as far back as to, Season 3 of Apex, where they fought Lunatic High. A lot of talent on that roster. Overall, I think the best players that are coming to Korea, coming from Korea to this league, everyone is talking about them. Like, I don't think there's that many like super secret gems that like no one's talking about. Outside of the Toronto guys we just talked about, and for example, the less popular players that are joining Shanghai Dragons, for example, everyone's talking about Ding, and how good he is, but I think we do need to look at Yeon-joon, we need to look at Koma, Luffy, and some of the players. There's a lot of hype around players like Michelle, for example, because he has such a how do I put this? Like, he's got such a hyped background for his Lucky Future Zenith career, because that team is like the B tier Runaway. Like, everyone who watched China was like, this team's kind of like Runaway. I love them a lot. They're popular, and there's a lot of hype around him. But I just don't think he's as good as everyone's kind of leading people to believe.
Okay. What about some of the players that have joined the Florida Mayhem then? Because one of the things they obviously did is just rehaul the whole squad and add loads of Koreans. So there's a couple of players people recognise, but some of them are somewhat obscure even for the Korean scene. So would you have any insight on some of these players?
BQB is probably the best like DPS based Sombra that I've ever seen, and that includes Overwatch League. I've never seen a Sombra player that can kill people, farm ult as quickly as he does, land massive EMPs. He's terrifying, absolutely terrifying on the Sombra. He could play Tracer as well, but probably not going to be that necessary, at least not in my opinion, and early on in the meta. So he's absolutely a scary player. I think a lot of people recognize that, though. I don't feel like, I'm like the hipster for thinking that, but it has been a while since he's played, since there were like some scandals around him after the Season 1 of Contenders Korea. So he was kind of like, don't put him on a team right now in Korea. Like, no one wants to talk about BQB at the moment. But I think he's super good.
It's like I mean, I'm trying to think who would be the person I would pick for this. It's like someone with time travel technology. It's obviously gonna have to be some Western scene player, right? Went back in time and was like, they kind of did like the Doctor Strange out of Avengers Infinity War Wolf, which is they were like, there's only one future in which Koreans dominate the Overwatch League. It's like, wow, what do you have to do to make that happen? I have to go back in time and make them all match fix and boost. It's like, why is there so many scandals around all the players? Like, the Korean players I used to know in esports literally just sat, and because they only spent about 1 hour a day not looking at a screen, they didn't have any time to get into any scandals. These guys are like, it's like they were all on the Wild Wild West or something. What the fuck's going on? They were like, yeah, of course, he's settled down now, but he used to be out hustling horses back around those ranches. It's like, if old man McCary catches him, he said he'll string him up. It's like, fucking hell. Anytime a new player joins, it's like, yeah, he's really sick. Hopefully he doesn't get banned for 2 months. What? It's like as soon as a player joins the Overwatch League who's really sick now, all your question is, right, what did he do? Why wasn't he in the league before? They're like, oh, yeah. It's just because he used to make a few posts on this forum. All right, what did he say back in the day? Oh, just a load of political stuff that means he's banned for life. Like, oh, brilliant, yeah. Can everyone just play fucking Overwatch, please? It's too much, isn't it? Right, what about you then, Wolf? What are you thinking of coming over, joining the Overwatch League, leaving Korea behind temporarily? You?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm really excited. It's been... I don't have a house yet. I've been crashing on people's couches. I got a car within 24 hours because I just don't want to waste money on Ubers everywhere I go. There's no public transportation here. I can't get on like a subway train to Monty's house. So I need a car, or I need to use Ubers or Lyfts, which are pretty expensive here. Like the cost of an Uber, like on average, is like 4 times the cost of like a Korean taxi for the same distance as well. So I'm just kind of adjusting. I'm excited to work on Overwatch League because I haven't worked on a tournament this big, like really ever, I'd say. So it's going to be a fun new challenge for me. And I'm really excited to commentate for a live crowd. Because obviously in Korea, we have the audience, on Twitch, on stream. The viewership is, oftentimes really big there, but it's totally different to actually cast in front of a live audience. It's not like I haven't done it before. I've done tons of, international events where that's the case, but for like a regular season match, it's a really different feeling. And, that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to.
To be fair though, like the one upside, even if Uber costs a lot more than a Korean taxi, the upside is you just order the Uber and then it takes you where you want to go. There's not any sort of negotiation process where the guy's just like, where do you live? And then you tell him and he goes, no. And then you go, what? Your job is literally to take me where I want to go. And they're just doing that like head shaking, like, no. It's like, that's why I always tell people, like, the best piece of advice a Korean girl once gave me is that thing where, like, you get in the taxi first, because then, like, it's like they're legally supposed to not be able to turn you away. But, like, obviously, we're all trained in the West to ask through the window where you want to go, don't you? Like, that's, like, the worst move. Because here's the problem for anyone who doesn't know. What's mad is, because there's obviously so many ridiculous, like, bomb-ass, hippie English teachers or just like GI type guys who are just going to get drunk in Korea and then try and get in a taxi, and yeah, they're probably going to like throw up in the back and then just leave, and then that guy has to deal with it, right? Unfortunately, by default, if they see you and you're a Westerner and you look like you've been drinking and you're like walking around Hongdae or something, they try not to pick you up, right? Monty, can you imagine the nightmare there? If you are someone who is on your own and you're a Westerner, you've been out drinking, you need that fucking taxi home. I can't walk like 2 kilometers home, can I? What is this? At 4 a.m, but I gotta have this taxi. So you know what I actually had to start doing, Monty? I'll just tell this anecdote because it's so ridiculous. I had to start walking 2 extra subway stops distance away so that the trip was long enough that the taxi guy would want to take me in the taxi, because I was just too close for him to want to take me, but just too far to want to walk. It's like I was in the no man's land. It was a nightmare. So I actually used to actively walk 2 stops the wrong direction and then get a taxi back. It's like
my favorite thing is like when you're in Korea and they don't want to take you because you're like a foreigner, and you talk to them in Korean, right? And you tell them, in perfectly comprehensible Korean where you want to go, and they pretend not to understand you, right? And so then what you do is you take out your phone and you literally
take a picture,
write it in Korean for them. Like I would like write it in Korean. I'd be like, okay, if you can't understand me, surely you are literate, correct? So I like show it to them, and then they'll just pretend not to understand. And at that point, I'm just like, fuck you.
Well, if you sit, so I used to do this. I think the taxis in Korea, like definitely the problems you guys are describing right now are like a lot worse, like 3 or 4 years ago. Now
Yeah,
the
they were.
Kakao
That's
taxis,
true.
I think it's much better. But like nowadays, when I get a taxi, like the people usually take me. I sit in the back. But before that, during the era of like the bad taxi era, when also taxis were like on strike all the time and they're really unhappy about a lot of stuff, I'd sit in the front seat always instead of the back. Because that's where the taxi driver's like identification number and all that stuff is.
Right.
And if they like try to fuck with me, I just like pull my phone out and take a picture of it and like smile at them, and they'll like curse at me and take me where I want to go.
That's a strength. I didn't use
That also, by the way, is also proof that like this is when I went to Korea is what made me understand how children learn language, because it's not even literally telling them the words. They learn it by sort of like a logical process of elimination and intuitively picking up on, a word gets repeated. Because I actually never took any Korean lessons. I've only read like the odd book that had a few phrases in. But I very quickly realised all the brilliant insults everyone was using around me when they knew I didn't speak any Korean. It was pretty rough. I can't lie. They weren't that polite, believe it or not, when they knew that you didn't know what they were saying. They weren't always that polite.
Yeah. I've overheard it. It's funny because there's a lot of Koreans in LA, and like no one would ever like of all the people like who could speak Korean. Like if you're in Korea, there's a Westerner there. There's a chance that Westerner speaks Korean because he lives in Korea, right? But I've definitely overheard a lot of conversations people probably didn't think I could hear.
Oh no, here's the thing,
so
Wolf.
far.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you this. Your first role in the Overwatch League, don't make the mistake Monty does. Don't go up to players who are Korean and start trying to say things in Korean and show, like, hey, I understand your culture, I'm bridging the gap here. If you do that, you're going to blow the whole gig. What you need to do is when they're all stood around or they're in a practice room, you just sit like one of those like spies from like a 70s movie, like reading a newspaper, just listening to everything they're saying. And then as a result, you'll have the most inside line on everything.
I'm like the guy with the headphones in, but I'm not listening to music, so people think.
Yeah, like the 80s spy movie. Yeah, you're like you're coming in to like replace a light bulb or something. Like, right, okay. Any final words at the end of this segment?
Just
cheer for you. You'll show good games.
Yeah, I'll show good casting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess like. Look forward to the Hangzhou Spark. I mean, we didn't talk about them that much because I know everyone's talking about them already.
Yes.
There's not much to discuss, but they're the team to watch. Like I think they will be like a top 5 team. I think that's.
I think that's
really reasonable. Yeah,
at least it's better.
Absolutely.
If that happens, then
team.
Do you think then we might actually be in a world where, for example, other teams will import Chinese players? Because obviously at the moment, in theory, the past before was you were only going to do it if you're a Chinese team. So is that actually a possibility?
I don't think so. I think these players, Crystal and Gushwei, are like insanely like what's the word I'm like for this? They're anomalies. Like this is they are like outliers.
Yes.
They are just insanely talented. They worked really hard. And they rose to the top with a really good Overwatch World Cup team. And obviously they played in Contenders China as well, but like this probably won't happen again. Like I don't think we'll see teams pull Chinese players unless they're again like anomalies like this. People aren't just going to say, "Oh, well, this player's doing really well in Chinese contenders." Like, so let's just buy him. Like you see Koreans get picked up like that. Where sometimes I feel like the teams buy players just because they're placing in contenders, but they don't actually look at the individual player how good he is. But like I don't think we're going to have like just Chinese imports scattered around teams until the Chinese region as a whole gets stronger, because again, I think it's still Korea's way better than China. But these 2 players in particular are special, and that's why they're the ones on this roster.
Yeah. Well, no, that's the joke, as you're saying. Like, it does look as though some teams, the way they pick up, it's like, you do wonder if they just went on, like, the Liquipedia page or something and saw, like, the results and were like, get this team. It's like, that's why I always thought the most genius hustle of all time was Chengdu Panthera. Because what it's that, like, I'll give you the analogy, okay? Here's the analogy for what Chengdu Panthera is. So, people might know I love to eat low-quality food like kebabs. So, when I go and eat kebabs, right, the problem with kebabs is...
In fact, you only eat low-quality food.
Pretty much, yeah. The problem with it is, though, there aren't actually very many options, unsurprisingly, to get like a luxury gourmet kebab. You know, usually even like the meat is like very low quality, and the way it's cooked, it's like it's not in a fucking restaurant. You know, it's like cooked just on a grill or something. And here's the thing that always tilts me is if I ever go in, I actually don't want to see how they make the food, because when they make the fries, right, they cook up a whole batch of fries, and then if you just get one portion of fries, the fries sit there, right? Now, if it was you or I and we wanted to make the most high quality fries, Wolf, we would throw out the old fries, and when someone orders some new fries, we'd make a new batch again, wouldn't we? Ah, no, my friend. What they do is they take the old fries, they chuck them in, they put some more fries in as well, they do a little sort of mix up, and you don't know which ones are the old recooked fries and which ones are the new ones. That is what Chengdu Panthera has been doing for the last 3 years. They just keep going like, hey, look at the, you used to be really good, you know? It's like, are these the players that did any of those things or not? It's like you need like a fucking private detective to tell you if these actually are Chengdu Panthera players or not. So fair play to them. It's a good hustle, but I don't know. I'm skeptical.
All these players,
a finder's fee must be a hell of a drug, though.
When you look at Hangzhou Spark, it's like all the players that were on teams that didn't do extremely well, but they were like the star players. It's a team full of flatas, practically, if that makes sense. Like it's a team full of like, God, you know, Godsby's so good, but X6 is having a bad season. Dora's on the Foxes. He's clearly the star player, but the rest of the team just can't hold up. Bazzy's the same. It's a team of all-stars, even though and no one's saying that because everyone wants to be like, this is the hipster team. Like, I'm cool because I liked Hangzhou Spark before it was cool, but I mean, all these players are unknown to most Western fans, but they've been playing for a long time, and they're all really good. And, I mean, I think no one's underestimating this team, so I'm not trying to say, like, watch Spark, like, don't forget about this team. But I just didn't really talk about it. I did want to echo that sentiment that they're going to be really good.
Okay. Cheers, Matt.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, peace. Thanks. Right, we've reached the last segment. So, good or a bad thing, depends who you are, really. You know, it's like that Chinese proverb. Who can know, right? Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. See how this segment goes, shall we? So, right, Volamel. Basically, I've drafted you in, and I'm going to task you with easily the worst job of anyone who appeared on this show, which is you have to help us talk about the teams no one else wanted to talk about.
Let's go.
Because the problem is, like, as you might expect, you know, the problem with this mega episode concept is if everyone came on and everyone had really distinct opinions, it'd be the best concept ever, because you just have a show with like 10 guests or something. But the problem is, because people come on and it's sort of like, you know, they're not in the room when the other person's here, everyone does just come on and go like, I think the Hangzhou Spark will be pretty good. It's like, yeah, we know, everyone fucking does. Like, that's not even an opinion at this point in time. That's like saying like, I wonder if I'll get red if it rains later. It's like, yeah, we all know that. So here's the thing. A lot of players also, like you'd expect, were too scared to say who's going to be bad. So first question is, can you list some teams who will probably be bad? Asterisk, obviously we're using in the context that someone has to be bad, someone has to come last. So go ahead, everyone out there who wants to get outraged. And, you know, I'll just get some guy now. We'll get Monty, we'll dub it in later to go like, only 16 teams can compete in the league. Some teams will come last place. Last place relative to first place is bad. Therefore, like, and then you know, and then we can just now use terms
and conditions may apply.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, who actually do you think should be the worst teams?
I think it's. I could be sleeping on the Uprising a little bit, so I won't. You know, my opinion's out on them, but I think my bottom three, like consistently, probably have to be Justice, Mayhem, and either the Hunters or the Outlaws, depending on exactly what happens there. So we'll see. I think Florida just has like a lot of last year's really cool talent that I would have loved to see. I just don't know how they'll work this year, because I think overall this season has leveled up in terms of scouting and the overall kind of level of play. I just don't think that team in particular, with how things have kind of unraveled, has a good foot going forward. I think the Outlaws, in the same sense that I've kind of rated a lot of the, you know, traditional 12 teams, I don't think they've made enough of a change that they'll stack up really well. I think they're too specialized almost, like with their flex tanks and their DPS. They're just too rigid, where you have to move people around. I think that's been a narrative or a theme for them for a really long time. And then the Justice, there's a lot of question marks around that team. How good is Wizard Young? I really like Otto. I've been very wishy-washy over the years with Giannis.
Thing is, though, when you say that, I know what you mean. That is obviously the big storyline for that team. Obviously, is they got Wizard Young, the guy. Some people thought this guy was the best coach. That is in itself a good narrative. But even as much as I think this will be his test, when you say that, well, how good is he? It's like he is a coach, not a fucking miracle worker. It's not like you could just literally give him any players and then they're like, oh, they're the best team. What do you know? He must be a good coach. Even a Michelin star chef can't just use a piece of string, an old button, and a dead rat and make you a gourmet pate, can he? You've got to give this guy something to work with. So I know what you mean, but
definitely 100%.
There's a lot of nuance to that narrative.
100%. You can only do so much with Walmart fish when you're trying to make gourmet sushi, right? There's only so much that you can really do it. But I am interested to see what that team does look like after stage one. I think stage one is a complete wash for them. There's no chance that, sorry, Washington fans, there's no chance that your team is going to look halfway decent. And if they can kind of keep their mental state together into season 2 or stage 2, it'll be interesting. And then the Hunters, God bless China. Like them quite a bit. I think the region's very fun, but this team is, I think it has a really fun and interesting way that it was built, in the same way that I think Paris was built, that it has a theme. They were built with a color in mind. So they're very aggressive. They want to play very aggressive. They want to play these weird styles, coming back from their coach. Will it work? That's the question. I don't know. So
wait a minute, Volamel.
Yes.
As I have already gone to great pains to articulate on other shows, you have tried the hipster route, right? You were watching Chinese Overwatch when I'm pretty sure even Chinese people didn't watch Chinese Overwatch. So if you do that, Volamel, you've gone the wrong way. What you're supposed to do is come in telling us about how all these players no one knows. Because they don't know them, you're supposed to be like, well, actually, he's a pretty good player. He's kind of underrated by some people, but I think he's pretty good. Why are you going the other way? This is the all Chinese thing.
I'm just trying to give a brief overview of that team.
The problem with watching Chinese contenders was that even the Koreans were winning Chinese contenders.
Yes,
so
exactly.
You can't really hype them up when they were getting beaten by Korea, Lucky Future Zenith in their own region.
So you're not feeling these to be some revelation in terms of Chinese players doing well as a proper team?
That's the sad part. I do think there is a Chinese all-star team that you could make, and I've kind of been very public in saying this. I just think they're kind of scattered. I think you guys, I'm sure, have talked about
or they're not old enough. Is the other
exactly right? I'd love to have Leave and Chai come into this team. I think that that would be an incredible DPS line. The World Cup team minus a few people of 2018, I think would do very well and kind of set a good precedent for Chinese Overwatch. But with the pieces that are left, for whatever reason, RNG and Huya couldn't necessarily grab some of the premier talent. I think Hunters have done a pretty good job. I just want to see, day one, what they look like and what some of these weird strats are. Because, I've heard some things and stuff's looking a little weird with them. So we'll see.
We also discussed this earlier, but the other thing they've done is by assembling the all-Chinese roster, they've set themselves up to be the most attractive location for future Chinese players. So even if they're not great this season, that doesn't mean necessarily that because they have chosen this route, they can get maybe Shy and Leave in the future to join the roster.
And they already, they're the first Chinese team to at least formally announce their academy team, which is Lingon Esports. That does have some talented players on there. So they already have a feeder system upwards. They have some pre-established talent in there that we may see. I'd love to see a player by the name of Kami kind of step up, maybe even be a two-way player in the place of Jinmu. I think Jinmu can be very reminiscent of Arhan at times, and I know that Monte loves to talk about Arhan, so you might have a fun time talking about Jinmu this season. We'll see.
It's the way of all the players that got into the Overwatch League. Neither Arhan or Recry got in. What a waste of time that first season was.
Well, Arhan's on the Outlaws. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot.
Yeah,
You forgot later.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's because they never fucking played him half the time.
I mean, the crime of Overwatch League is that Arhan got in and Recry didn't.
Indeed. Right, what about this then? So, believe it or not, a team we haven't talked about is the Fusion. Like, they've barely been referenced at all on the show. Now, interestingly, they obviously only made one change. They added Elk in terms of the team, but aside from that, everyone else here is just the original Fusion team. Now, sure, they came second. They did a very good job in season 1. Right, being as the theme of the off-season is like all these expansion teams, some of the other teams adding extra talent. Is Philadelphia Fusion still going to be a top team?
I definitely think there's a potential there for them to be a top team. I think when I was kind of going through my power rankings, I did kind of sleep on the fact that they didn't have Otto for the entirety of the season. And even with that in mind, I still I'm not entirely too sure if I'm sold on Otto just yet. I think Sato, I'm sorry, not Otto. Otto plays for the Washington Justice. I'm mistake. Sato in particular, for the playoffs last season, I think that he had kind of a middling performance. I think he tends to be very greedy with his primal rage.
He fed in the finals.
Yeah, like wasn't great, right? So yeah, a lot of people want to hype him up and they talk about Carpe and EQO and this and that, and like they're really good players, and I still think they'll be a playoffs caliber team. I just want to see if those kind of inconsistency issues have been solved, if the coaching staff, the additions of, Christopher coming in and, the kind of restructuring that they've done, have they kind of solved those issues? Because if they haven't, I don't know. We'll have to see. But, this is still a team that could be upgraded. I think, like you mentioned, Elk brings a nice style. I think that he's very much a player who isn't afraid to kind of force his will on you. Like he'll just pick Ana in situations that other teams won't pick Ana. I think that's really kind of interesting. So we'll see. I think we might see a different look from them come regular season.
It's also possible that we just might see Fraggy, considering he's the Rhine expert. If they're going to be running a lot of goats, then you could theoretically make an argument that Fraggy would be potentially starting on certain maps where they're going to run Rhine goats the entire time.
Definitely, I think that I haven't taken a really deep look at the map pool, but yeah, there's definitely a possibility. I think that could be kind of worrying almost. I do agree that Fraggy's Rhine is very good, but has the team necessarily been practicing with him all that much? Have they just kind of been trying to run auto? I mean, I don't know those questions, but I'm sure we'll see them answered come season 2.
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot of hype around them either from the other teams. I assume they're probably going to be sort of middle of the road as when the season starts, and they'll be stronger in different metas. I'm also not sold entirely on a lot of the coaching changes that they've made, not because I think that nothing to do with Christopher or Hui or Hayes. I just don't like teams that decide to use co-head coaches, because sometimes in those situations, no one is willing to make the hard decisions because they don't, right? So I never liked that structure, and I'm not sure it's going to be. It certainly didn't work for Seoul last season, and I'm not sure it's going to work for Philly this time around.
Makes sense.
Where in your power rankings did you have Paris Eternal Volamel?
I have them 14th. I have them right above the Guangzhou Charge and right below Atlanta.
Okay, why are you down on that team?
Overall, I think I kind of expected there to be a bigger patch coming into season 2, but with the kind of reminiscence of goats that we probably will see, I think everybody has kind of pegged it around like 60 to 70% goats. I think they actually could do a lot better. I think so too. This is the European team coming in. I think they're overblown in a sense, so they're kind of top heavy because everybody's like, all the coaches. I still think the players are quite good. I'm not entirely too sure. Some of the players on there, namely, I think Shadowburn. He's a Genji. He does okay. I think his far has been kind of wishy-washy over the years, not really all that solid. But yeah, he can still like just mechanics you with Genji and pull off some of those, all-star plays. But, how consistently can he do that? That's the big question. I don't think he will see too much play time. But overall, I think it is your kind of team's team. I think that's the big narrative around the Paris Eternal. The team that from Europe is more than the sum of their parts. Very reminiscent of CLG for all you League of Legends fans out there. I think they'll do okay. I think they'll do pretty well. Am I as high on them as someone like IOSEX is coming in saying that they'll be top 5? No, I definitely don't think so. But if they can stay with tanks and they can maybe even force tanks, if the patch changes and they can kind of stick to their guns and play that style, I think they'll be okay.
Where do you have them, Monty? Like, what sort of range do you think of this team?
I actually think they may go as high as 8, at least in this meta.
Sure.
Right. If I promise you, I will in the next couple of days before the season starts, I will make a video where I will do my stage 1 power rankings because obviously I'm not going to make an end of this. Like, I don't think anybody can feasibly make this is how the teams are going to look at the end of stage 4 without knowing what patches are going to be coming. So I will make one now that I've observed many of these teams in person and talked to a lot of people, what I think is going to be like the stage 1 GOATS meta power ranking. And I think I'll probably be putting them somewhere between 8 and 10. We'll have to see when I actually sit down and work everything out where they're going to end up. But I think they're going to be strong in this patch.
That's when you say there that obviously you're not just going to try and predict the entire season with all like the unexpected things. That just reminds me of, in League of Legends, they used to do that thing where it was like you pick the teams that are going to win the entire League of Legends World Championship, but you do it before it begins. Like, you have to pick all the groups, all the matches. And famously, like, there was one year, I think it was season 6 was the one where like the wildcard team made the top 8, where as a result, like, there was
also,
something
that was the same season where they eliminated lane swaps like right before Worlds or whatever.
Yes.
So how can you predict that?
Well, the thing is, this season, I just remember that once all these mental upsets had gone on. So, for example, for context, there was one upset where like the number 1 team in the world from Korea lost a best of 1 to like this wildcard team from like Russia and like CIS region. And cause obviously, like, who the fuck would have picked that as part of their results? When it got down to like near the finals or something, there was only supposedly literally like one person in the whole world who'd picked this particular bracket. And what's great is when they went and found this guy, because like this is what people are like, they just found this guy's like alias. He even said something mad like, "Oh yeah, I think I just did that when I was drunk or something." Like, like that's all you needed to know. Like, if it was true that he could predict it, that guy would be obviously like he would be the prophet, wouldn't he? He'd be like the one like, "Oh my god, like we found the most genius like." And then even he's just like, I think I was just drunk and picked the wrong players. It's like, no, well, there we go. That's predictions in a nutshell for you right there. It was literally just some sort of mad Darwinian process. He just happened to survive. Right. What about on the other end of the equation then, Volamel? Which team should everyone hype as like these are the gods of the Overwatch League?
I'm assuming everybody's kind of said Spark for that, right?
Everyone pretty much has, yeah.
I think Shock are a little bit overrated from the community, but I still think that they could pull off a very London-esque season this stage. I think by the end of it, we'll probably see them whittle the roster down into like, this is who we're going with. And I think that's a decent method. I don't know how strong of a method that necessarily is, but I think they have incredibly good pieces around them. I think they have a chance to kind of struggle early on if they're going to compete for kind of playtime. And if there's any kind of like internal squabbles that happen behind the scenes, that can definitely kind of sour things. But again, very much like London, if they whittle it down, could have a patch or two that they could peak on. But I think, yeah, Shock should be a team that everybody kind of looks at and is excited for because they have exciting pieces. I think, you put Striker in that team again. How far can you push Striker? We saw him on Boston kind of adapt to Hangzhou and even pull out a little bit of Widow, even some Junkrat, I believe. So I think, overall, Shock should be a team that people kind of keep an eye on.
Okay. Monty, we've talked about the players, but what do you actually think is the real expectation for Shock?
I think they could be the best team in stage 1.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. Like, they may be somewhat hamstrung by the fact that Violet is suspended, but Sleepy's a good flex support player as well. So I don't know how much that will slow them down. I think they have a lot of versatility and options with their roster. I think Krusty is a really good coach. The coaching staff that they've assembled around the team is very active. I think one of the funny things was I visited their team house, and they are certainly the loudest team that I've encountered. It was pretty fun to be there. Basically, like it was super funny because obviously they've got all these players that aren't playing in a scrim at any time because they're the only 12-player roster in the league right now. And so what would happen is that 6 players will be playing, right? And Krusty will be running around shouting the entire time during the scrim. And then all the players that aren't playing are huddled up around the assistant coach's computer where they're watching the scrim live. And all the assistant coaches will be shouting at the screen and shouting to all the players that are watching, and all the players who aren't playing are shouting at the screen. So there's Krusty like running around shouting, and then there's like a cluster of people all around one PC also shouting, and it was just fucking crazy. It was really funny, and it seems to work for them. But they're a really, really direct team in terms of their feedback. It's very instantaneous. Different teams have different coaching styles, but they're definitely like everybody shouting all the time, fix this shit immediately. The criticism comes thick and fast, as it were. So it's pretty fun to be in their team facility.
Okay, what about this? So Volamel, if we talk about the New York Excelsior, I actually feel like the New York Excelsior is an example of where, like, you try to get away from narratives, but sometimes, like, it's like narratives take on a life of their own, and they become a real tangible thing. Because obviously the laziest narrative anyone could give after stage 1 of the Overwatch League was like, haha, look, LW Blue players have choked in the playoffs, ha, never saw that coming. And then it's like, obviously after that, they were the dominant force, they're winning all the things, they were the favourites coming in. And then now this year, after the off-season, they've added players. It's like, but on paper, look how strong the lineup is. It's like, yeah, that's what we used to say all the time then as well. Like, that was every Apex season, every single time. Like, but is this the time they're going to do it? So, Volamel, the age-old question, is this lineup of super sick players going to win the Overwatch League?
It has to. And if it doesn't, then I seriously think some restructuring needs to happen or some reevaluation, because if you can't at least make the playoffs, at least, make a deep run and go into the grand finals, come, the season's end. I don't know who on earth can at this point, if this roster cannot. You're finally seeing Flower and Pine after, years of kind of dodging each other and having a couple moments where they actually do get to play. They finally get to kind of play with one another. Will we see that duo pop off? I don't necessarily think so, but it'll be fun for all the old fans, right? They still have Jonak again, paradigm shifter, crazy MVP for everything, every time. I was under the assumption, because I had kind of already assumed that they were going to draft Flower up. I don't think you pull Flower in from Korea and put him on your academy roster if you don't kind of want to move him up and kind of keep that team together. So I was under the assumption that they were going to actually get rid of Libero. So I'm interested to see how that dichotomy works between Flower and Libero and exactly when and where they play either one of them. I kind of was excited to see Libero get put on a team like Dallas Fuel, for instance. I think he could have actually had a crazy performance there and really shined, because it seems like he's always trapped under some very, very big names that people kind of remember from the old days and are very fond of. You know what? Maybe Dallas Fuel isn't the greatest example for that, but still. I still think he could have done well. Maybe not necessarily shined as much as I would have liked him to, but
that was a very unusual way he set up
that.
Because he started out like, I'd like to see Libero on a different team, not, I'd like to see him on a team like the Dallas Fuel, because the thing is, in New York Excelsior, he's trapped down by all these old names. He used to be really good. It's like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Completely backed myself.
There's some sort of like microwave signal interfered with his brain while he's halfway through that explanation. That's like, okay, what about this Monte? What is the actual... What would hold them back, the Excelsior? Are there any obvious flaws?
Well, like I said, when I was talking to Ark earlier, when I was asking him how Jonak's DPS is and how Mecco's DPS is, and his answer was not great, basically. And he said, it's okay, though, because other teams, flex supports and flex tanks, are also bad at playing DPS. Not really an answer, honestly. But I think that in this meta where you we've been talking about it, a lot of the teams are playing triple or quad DPS, and that requires either your flex tank or your flex support to flip over to a DPS hero. And if you don't have that level of skill at those positions on DPS, then you're either forced. So the problem is that, okay, your answer might be, well, why don't we just put in one of our DPS players instead of a flex tank? But then if you have to switch back to goats, which frequently happens in this meta, then you don't have a good diva player, right? Potentially. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a problem for certain teams. And I think that they will still sort of, struggle with that if Jonak and Meko aren't up to snuff. And if their plan is basically just to play goats every time, then they better be really fucking good at goats to be able to beat anti-goats comps with goats, right? So I guess I'm still a little bit concerned about their flexibility in this meta in that way. I still think they're going to be probably like a top 8 team in stage 1, but I don't think this is a great meta for New York overall.
Yeah, for stage 1 specifically, I would tend to agree. I think they're going to have to seriously restructure how the starting 6 looks. But I do think that they can feasibly run a GOATS comp with the roster that they have and still have the flexibility. It is going to be weird because you probably have to put Libero and Nene in over one of your flex DPS slots and Meko. Probably Nene over Meko in that kind of scenario. But I still think you can kind of feasibly run goats, and then on like a map like Nimbani, right, where you have to run goats towards the end and for second. But first you want like some of the weird looks. You want the Pharah, you want the Sombra, maybe you want a Doomfist on defense, depending if you're European or not, who knows. But yeah, I would tend to agree. Like stage 1 might not be the best look, but as we transition into whatever patch Blizzard has in store for us, they should. I feel like this team still should be okay. I still get the same vibes as like the 2018 South Korean World Cup roster. It's just like huge names, big, lots of skill. Some of the best talent in the world still kind of rests on this lineup. So
when you listed off the teams that were at the bottom, I noticed the Dallas Fuel was not among them.
No, I apparently things are not going super strong in Dallas Fuel's camp, but I still think that. Okay, so my issue with Dallas is I don't want them to burn effect super long. I think that if you can properly integrate him back in and kind of keep him. Rehabilitate is a strong word, but I think if you can kind of slowly integrate him in, I still think he can be one of the best players in the world. If you can kind of keep him not level-headed, but just create an environment for him that he can succeed in, right?
Just a lot of trust falls, like having people hold a rope while he does like rock climbing,
I mean, we
restore his faith in humanity.
I seriously think that he needs time to kind of get back into the professional scene. I think that's season 1 definitely took its toll on him. So if they can slowly integrate him back in, I think they could like ramp up towards the end. But I'm hearing people super excited about their addition to the main supports, and don't have to play Harry Hook anymore, and Zachary definite. Yes. And I've heard that he can speak English. I'm still always very questionable when you have like a bunch of, a super mixed roster, exactly how that works. I think I have a very strong bias when we approach that. Like similarly with the Guangzhou charge, right? Exactly what are they going to call with? How is that going to work behind the scenes? There's a lot of questions there. So I kind of have to limit my expectation. But no, I don't think that Fuel should do all that bad. Maybe stage 1, things could be a little bit rough because historically this is a team that actually should be good at GOATs, or at least should be at least familiar with it. But it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. But overall, I think they should have an all right season. I don't think it should be as bad as last season if everything, stays the course and nobody just kind of like falls.
Right, for our last question, who is the new player? It has to be someone who wasn't in Overwatch League in Season 1. Who's the new player you are personally looking forward to watching the most?
Why is it always a flex DPS with me? I don't know. I feel like I'm just enticed by these flex DPS. I think mine this season is Erster for the same reason why mine was Fleta last season.
Okay, this is for the Atlanta Reign, yeah.
Yes, I think he's incredibly flexible. has the potential to be, a world caliber DPS player. Will fit any meta. Pretty much can play any DPS. Again, what happens during stage 1? We'll have to see exactly, what teams are breaking out. How anti-goats is anti-goats. Are we pulling out the quad DPS that we've seen in the East? Are we doing like triple DPS? I think he can fit really well with them, and I'm kind of interested to see how Atlanta works. I've heard good things, but Erster has come from China, or at least a Korean Chinese team. We'll kind of like talk about it,
Right.
But it looked really good domestically in China. Looked really good in PAC. Now he's playing with the big boys on the biggest stage in Overwatch. So he's definitely my rookie player to look out for.
Okay. What do you think of the Rain generally, Monty?
It's a hard one.
Yeah, it is hard. I think they'll be okay. I think they are also going to have some communication issues with their mixed roster, at least at first, while some of the Korean players get more comfortable with English. I guess I don't know. They'll probably be like low mid tier, I'd say. Maybe I'd put them at like 14th ish. I think they're going to take some time to really ramp up, but we'll see how Erster does. I also think this may not be the meta for them. I'm not sure if they're going to be a great GOATS team, but they may be better if in a more traditional 2-2-2 meta.
Okay. Right. Do you have any sort of closing message for people about season 2 here, Volamel?
I think a lot of people are sleeping on the fact that this is going to be, another level up in terms of the skill ceiling. I think has seriously been raised. I think the scouting again for a lot of these expansion teams has gone very, very well. I look at like the Defiant, for instance. I look at the Spark drafting some of the teams that I think we all as fans would have loved to draft, or as kind of pundits. I think they're seriously going to put a stamp on the legitimacy of the top contenders teams, and say, you know what, contenders can compete at a certain point. There is that threshold that you have to kind of meet, but the top contenders teams regionally should do very well, and I think we're going to see that come season 2. So the original 12, I think you're put on notice.
All right, cheers, Matt.
Thanks.